FBI detective, this video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 376, Los Angeles XC Zone, Sewer. 5 minutes ago, Special Investigation Team, Office Area. After listening to Mona's narration about the clues of the 12 apostles of Jesus, Lassie suddenly realized, so, the murderer behind this case is actually a believer in the devil worship who wants to turn his soul into a devil after death. Anwar and Patricia showed enlightenment on their faces. Roan waved his hand and said, it doesn't have to be a believer in the devil worship. It is possible to target the Christian church, Christians, Christ himself, and fundamentalists. Winslow next to him thought for a while and added, it may also be a boy who believed in Christianity when he was a child, but was hurt by a priest. Winslow's words made the air in the office quiet for a few seconds. Roan looked up at Winslow, then turned his chair to look at Michelle and asked, how long will it take for Cheney and Cooper to come back? Michelle, who was responsible for contacting the two, put down the landline phone, raised his head and said seriously, bad news, I can't contact them anymore, and no one answered the phone. What? Hearing this, the faces of the detectives suddenly sank. Roan quickly got up from his chair and walked to Michelle and asked, where were they investigating the case? Los Angeles XC District. Michelle quickly answered. Cooper said before that they found clues about narcolepsy in a hospital in that area. Roan immediately ordered loudly, Patricia, use the landline to continue to contact Cooper and Cheney. Michelle, check the surveillance in that area and find the trace of our special investigation team SUV. Mona, see if you can use the computer to locate Cheney and Cooper's mobile phones. Okay, I'll locate them right away. Michelle and Patricia immediately started working, and Mona also opened her laptop and started typing. At this moment, Lassie suddenly put down her mobile phone and walked to Mona, pulled a piece of paper, and wrote down a string of numbers, and said, the phone that Michelle contacted before was Cheney's work phone. This is Cheney's private life phone. Now it can't be reached. Try to locate it with it. Winslow, Anwar and Patricia, who had just joined the special investigation team and didn't know Lassie's style of doing things, were surprised when they saw this. Michelle and Roan's eyelids twitched. Mona paused and asked in a low voice with a speechless face, when did you get this? Just when we set out to investigate the clues. Seeing the expressions of Roan and others, Lassie smiled. We are all teammates, so it's easy to get it. Roan patted Lassie's shoulder, and Lassie immediately put away the smile on her face and walked away from Mona. Mona also immediately began to investigate, based on the phone number. On the other side, not long after, Michelle raised her hand and shouted, I found the sub of the special investigation team. Roan and others immediately gathered around Michelle. The picture displayed on the computer was a certain intersection in the XC area of Los Angeles, not far from the hospital where Cheney, Cooper and the others were investigating. Michelle rewound the surveillance screen, which showed that Cooper parked the car at the intersection, and then he and Cheney ran out of the car and rushed into an alley not far away. Lassie, Anwar, Winslow, take all the equipment and come with me to investigate here immediately. After watching the surveillance video, Roan immediately strode to the equipment warehouse and ordered loudly, the rest of you stay with the special investigation team and continue to locate Cheney and Cooper. Understood. No problem. Because the matter was urgent, the intersection where Cheney and Cooper disappeared was a bit far from the FBI Los Angeles branch building, so Roan took the other 3 people to get on the same SUV this time. The first thing Lassie did when she got on the co-pilot of the SUV was to fasten her seatbelt tightly. Anwar and Winslow were a little confused when they saw this, but they looked at each other and fastened their seatbelts as well. The next second, the strong push on their backs scared the two of them. With a sharp sound of tires rubbing against the ground, the SUV left the parking lot and drove into the main road, and then the car rushed forward like a black lightning. Looking at the scenery outside the car window that was rapidly receding, Anwar swallowed his saliva. When he encountered an emergency at work in the counter-terrorism department, his colleagues had never driven so fast. Winslow's expression remained unchanged, and he continued to carefully check the guns and ammunition. However, his uncontrollable and rapid breathing showed that he was not as calm as he seemed. On the way, Lass's cell phone suddenly rang. She pressed the answer button and heard Mona's voice on the other end of the phone. "I have used Chanel's personal cell phone to locate the location. It is not far from the intersection in the surveillance. It should be that alley according to the map. I just sent a message to Chanel, but I haven't received a reply yet." "Well done." Roan nodded with satisfaction, turned the steering wheel, and the SUV immediately drove towards the store Mona mentioned. 3 minutes later, the SUV arrived at the designated location. Roan and Lassie got out of the car, took out their weapons, and approached the old SUV parked at the intersection. A simple search did not find any clues. Anwar and Winslow had already walked to the entrance of the alley with weapons. Roan and Lassie left the old SUV, and the four of them slowly entered the alley with weapons in hand. The alley was full of garbage. As the four walked deeper, it became more messy than other places, but there was less garbage on the ground, and there were many bloodstains on the walls. After a quick glance around the situation, Anwar frowned and said, "Cheney and Cooper must have encountered an emergency. There are more than one person on the other side." Winslow nodded and added, "It is likely that Cooper and Cheney entered here because they were chasing someone, and then they were ambushed. The two fought with the enemy, but they couldn't beat the group of people. They were controlled and taken away by the enemy." Lassie heard this and frowned while holding the weapon. Cooper and Cheney were both very skilled and had guns on them. If they were captured by the enemy, how many enemies were there, and how powerful were they? Luo An did not comment on their analysis. He carefully scanned the garbage around him. When he saw a piece of newspaper, his eyes lit up. He bent down to pick up the newspaper. A mobile phone lay quietly under the newspaper. On the other side, based on their past experience, Anwar and Winslow quickly found out the enemy's way out of the alley, a sewer covered with garbage. Looking at the manhole cover that was pulled open by the two, an indescribable smell came to her face. Lassie grinned and looked up at Anwar and Winslow. "Are you sure it's here?" "Sure." Anwar nodded repeatedly and explained, "Chanel and Cooper both worked in the FBI for a period of time. If there were a bunch of people in the alley, they wouldn't rush in recklessly. The only explanation is that the enemy suddenly appeared. This place is some distance away from the entrances and exits on both sides of the alley. Appearing from the two sewers and surrounding them is the most likely scenario." Winslow pointed to the edge of the sewer and added, "And the edge of this sewer entrance is very clean, with very little dust and dirt compared to other places. Someone must have gone in and out from here many times, or many people have gone in and out quickly from here. I understand the truth." After listening to what the two said and smelling the peculiar smell slowly coming, Lassie, who is biologically female, had her eyelids twitching. She turned her head to look at Luo An, who was fiddling with his mobile phone not far away. Chapter 377 Mole Spy Traitor. Seeing the phone in Luo An's hand, Lassie's eyes widened in surprise and said, "Isn't this Chanel's private phone?" "Luo An, where did you find it?" Lassie walked to Luo An while talking and looked down at Chanel's phone. On it was a memo page with two words, "Mole" and "Doctor." Obviously, this was a clue left by Chanel. But when she saw the word mole, Lassie fell silent instantly. This word not only means mole, but also means spy and traitor. Considering Chanel's good skills and shooting skills, and the fact that Cooper was the first to run out of the SUV in the surveillance video, countless guesses and ideas flashed through Lassie's mind. Seeing the uncertain expression on Lassie's face, Luo An guessed her thoughts immediately. Putting his phone away and putting it in his pocket, Roan glanced at Winslow and Anwar, who were standing beside him, and Lassie, and whose faces were also solemn. He patted Lassie's shoulder and said with a smile, "The word doctor obviously refers to the hospital that Chenier and the others investigated before. Lassie, you should go to that hospital immediately to check the situation and see which doctor is problematic. Then call SWAT for support and bring him back to the special investigation team." "But," Lassie looked up subconsciously when she heard this, but after seeing the expression on Roan's face, she immediately swallowed the rest of the words and nodded to accept the order. She stuffed the 3 stun grenades on her waist to Roan, and Lassie quickly left the alley. After shaking the 13 stun grenades on her waist and watching Lass's back gradually disappear, Roan glanced at Winslow and Anwar and waved his hand. Let's go into the sewer. Okay. Winslow and Anwar looked at each other and immediately turned around and walked towards the sewer entrance. Winslow took the lead, followed by Anwar. Roan stood at the sewer entrance and took a deep breath and was the last one to enter the sewer. The height of the Los Angeles sewers was quite high, and Roan and the other two could stand up straight. Smelly sewage was flowing slowly below, but fortunately the sewage was not very high. Turning on the lights on his helmet, Roan glanced around, and instead of heading to the left as he judged, he asked, which direction should we go? Left. X2 Winslow and Anwar said in unison, and after they finished speaking, they looked at each other. Winslow was the first to explain, there are traces of people walking on the left, but not on the right. Okay. Roan nodded and made a tactical gesture. Winslow once again rushed ahead of Anwar and walked out to the left of the three. Anwar frowned when he saw this, but he immediately followed. Roan walked at the end, following slowly. In the dark sewer, the lights above the heads of the three illuminated the way forward. With the sound of sewage, the three slowly moved forward with their weapons. The three passed through several cross-sectional sewer intersections in a row, but they judged the direction the same every time, so the speed of the three was not slow. Turning right again into another sewer, Roan suddenly said, "What do you think the mole left by Chinia means?" The three of them continued to move forward at the same speed. Anwar was silent for a few seconds. Winslow, who was at the front, thought for a moment and replied, "I think Chinia is talking about the mole tribe." The mole tribe is a unique landscape of the Federation. They are a group of homeless marginalized people who live in the abandoned subway tunnels under the most prosperous areas of major cities in the Federation. Like moles, they live a dark life. The ground above is the prosperous central area of major cities in the Federation in the world. The abandoned subway tunnels, or abandoned sewers under the ground, are the homes of the mole tribe. New York has the most mole tribes, Los Angeles and other large cities also have some, and Chicago has the least. After all, the folk customs in Chicago are more simple than those in other cities. The mole tribe will accumulate a lot of items picked up or stolen for living in their homes. For many brave and aggressive homeless people, this is a place where they can open free treasure chests. Luo An did not comment on the two's answers and continued to move forward for a while. Winslow, the leader, suddenly stopped and whispered, "There are people in front." Luo An also heard the movement not far ahead. The three of them turned off the lights on their helmets and slowly moved forward in the dark world. On the platform on the right side of an intersection for sewer cleaning workers to rest, under a dim light, three guys with pistols on their waists were squatting on the ground playing cards. The three of them were playing cards and joking, and their conversations never left the price and feelings of the white powder, and their performance and time in the bed of the woman on the street. Seeing this, Winslow frowned and whispered, "What should we do?" The three people in front of him were obviously guards. It was easy to shoot them, but once the gunshots attracted the attention of the enemies above the sewer entrance, things would be troublesome. Although Winslow was from the hostage rescue team, he did not dare to guarantee that he could rush out of the sewer entrance facing a group of enemy bullets. Anwar from the counter-terrorism department also thought of this. He was good at hard attacks and was silent for a few seconds before making a suggestion. "Let's use projectiles to break the lamp above their heads, and then..." Anwar stopped talking halfway because the three people on the opposite side also had guns in their hands. Once one of them opened fire, it would eventually attract the attention of the enemies at the sewer entrance. "Let's leave here temporarily and move to the ground from the sewer entrance on the other side." Winslow proposed his own idea, "Let's attack from the ground." Winslow, who came from the hostage rescue team, made the most reliable suggestion, but there were also some problems. For example, there were three enemies in the sewer, and there would be more enemies on the ground. "We are taking too long to do this." Walking at the back, Roan, who had just taken a bottle of hemostatic potion and a bottle of swift potion, while the two were not paying attention, shook his head, motioned Anwar and Winslow to retreat, put away his pistol, took out his own dagger, borrowed another from Winslow, and grinned. "I'll deal with these three people." X2 hearing this, Winslow and Anwar were confused, not understanding what Roan meant. As soon as they turned to look at Roan, their eyes were filled with shock. The two saw Roan rushing out from beside them at a very fast speed. A flash of white light passed by, and the dim light disappeared, and the entire platform fell into darkness in an instant. The three guys squatting on the ground playing cards were startled by this sudden situation, and they all subconsciously stood up and touched the pistols on their waists. The guy closest to Winslow and Anwar felt that he touched nothing, and then his throat hurt and he lay on the ground. The other two just pulled out their pistols from their waists when a flash of white light suddenly appeared in front of their eyes, and their hands holding the gun suddenly felt a sharp pain. Before the two could scream, the man standing on the left suddenly felt a sharp pain in his throat, as if something had been inserted into it. The guy on the right only felt two hands grabbing his head, and then he suddenly turned to the side and lost consciousness. The three drug addicts were dealt with silently. Roan turned on the light above his head and waved his hand to signal Anwar and Winslow to come over. It was time to take the next step. Not far away, Winslow and Anwar were dumbfounded and shocked. The sewer was too dark just now, and they didn't see Roan's specific movements at all. They only felt their eyes go black and then bright, and the three people who were squatting and playing cards fell to the ground and fell into a deep sleep. Selectively ignoring the admiring eyes of Winslow and Anwar, Roan stretched out his hand and began to climb the stairs of the sewer. Now the most urgent task is to find Chenier and Cooper as soon as possible. They have been missing for a long time. Winslow and Anwar's performance and words just now also made Luo An have some other ideas about the word mole. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 378 SWAT Support. Find Chenier and Cooper. In the sewer, Luo An was slowly climbing the iron stairs made of steel bars. He lifted the manhole cover and looked around. He found that this place was between two warehouses. At the door of the warehouse diagonally opposite, two middle-aged white men with their backs to this place were smoking and chatting. The perspective changed, and he saw a familiar building in the distance. Luo An recalled the Los Angeles map in his mind and judged that this should be the warehouse of a small movie prop manufacturing company in West Los Angeles. After lowering the manhole cover and returning to the sewer, Roan briefly explained the above situation to Winslow and Anwar. Without waiting for Winslow and Anwar to propose the next action plan, Roan took out his mobile phone and called Lassie. We are probably located in a company warehouse in West Los Angeles. Is the SWAT team dispatched? Lassie on the other end of the phone immediately replied, we are currently at the hospital. We will arrive at your location in 1 minute. Good. Roan nodded with satisfaction. Start the countdown. The action will officially begin in 1 minute and 30 seconds. If the enemy uses force to resist, it is allowed to be shot. Understood. Seeing Roan hang up the phone and order them to check their equipment, Winslow and Anwar were a little confused at first, but soon a flash of enlightenment flashed in Winslow's eyes, and Anwar also understood it after a few seconds. The two began to lower their heads to check their weapons. Roan, who had been observing the two, raised his eyebrows slightly and said nothing. The order to call the SWAT team was given by Roan when he asked Lassie to leave the alley. Lassie, who had been with Roan for a long time, naturally understood the subtext of his words. Winslow and Anwar also saw the word mole. The meaning of spy, traitor in the word easily made people think that there might be a mole inside their special investigation team. Roan asked Lassie to leave the alley, firstly to call the SWAT team for support, to ensure the smooth operation of rescuing Chenier and Cooper. Secondly, to ensure Lassie's safety. Anwar and Winslow were also new members of the special investigation team. If one of them was a mole in the sewer and took action, Roan was sure to ensure his own safety, but he could not guarantee Lassie's safety 100%. The third purpose of doing this was that Roan wanted to observe Winslow and Anwar's reactions in the sewer to determine whether there was a mole in the two. In order to prove that he was not a traitor, Winslow took the lead and walked in front, showing his back to his teammates to show that he was fine. If Anwar was a traitor, Roan could kill him the moment Anwar took action. Anwar also thought of this, but he was one step slower than Winslow when he rushed to the front of the three. in order to prove that he was fine and to keep an eye on Winslow for any unusual movements. Anwar did not ask Roan to stay behind, but stood in the middle of the team without thinking. During the whole process, Anwar's body was always in a vigilant posture ready to face any emergency. During the journey in the sewer, Anwar and Winslow each had their own thoughts and purposes, and Roan saw it clearly at the end. Coupled with the emotional perception in his mind, Roan arranged to remove the suspicion that the two were traitors, but he was also very satisfied with their performance. The new agent Roan wanted was not a reckless man who could not control his emotions and would only rush forward. Instead, he wanted an agent who was clear-headed at the critical moment, could correctly judge the situation, and make the right response. During the process of moving through the sewer, Winslow and Anwar showed very sophisticated tactical qualities and operational experience, and they were also very smart and brave. 1 minute passed quickly. Lassie and Roan used the phone to count down. 30 seconds later, 2 SWAT action team transporters boomed and broke through the door and rushed to the warehouse gate. A group of SWAT team members moved forward quickly with explosion-proof shields and rifles, shouting loudly, "Put your hands up. Put down your weapons. Put down your weapons. Get on the ground. Left, left. Move forward quickly." On the other side, Roan, Winslow and Anwar also rushed out of the sewer with their weapons at the moment when the scheduled time of 1 minute and 30 seconds arrived. The 2 middle-aged white men at the door of the warehouse were shocked by the sudden situation. Roan did not waste time with them. He threw 2 stun grenades at the door of the warehouse in front of Winslow and Anwar, whose eyelids were shaking. Boom. Boom. The blinding light and deafening explosion instantly subdued the 2 guards, and Roan and the other 2 followed the SWAT team members and rushed into the warehouse. Bang, 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 bang. Right. Right. Drop your weapons. There were many enemies in the warehouse, but facing the SWAT team members who were armed to the teeth and blocked the front and back doors of the warehouse, not many of them really resisted with guns. Most of them threw their pistols aside, put their hands on their heads, and lay on the ground with their butts sticking up. Bang, bang, bang. Roan led Winslow and Anwar to kill 3 armed enemies who fought back one by one, and then ran straight to the center of the warehouse to find the main targets of this operation, Chenier and Cooper. In the center of the warehouse, there was a movie prop similar to a gallows. Chenier and Cooper had their hands tied and their toes tied to it. There were 3 guys with boxing gloves and sticks around them. In front of the 2 was a middle-aged bald white man sitting on a wooden box prop with a smile on his face. Before the SWAT team took action, the bald man coughed and was about to continue talking when he was startled by the loud shouts and explosions outside. The bald man subconsciously stood up and turned back to order his 3 men to go out and check the situation. Seeing this, Chenier immediately raised her legs and turned over to hook the crossbeam above the gallows. Then she continued to turn over and sat upright on the crossbeam above the gallows. She lowered her head and used her teeth to quickly untie her hands that were tied by the rope. Cooper, who was also tied up, was stunned by this scene. He was just about to tell Chenier that this was a good opportunity to escape, but he didn't expect that Chenier would break free from the rope before he could say it. The bald white man turned around and saw Chenier on the gallows and was even more shocked. He didn't understand how Chenier did it. Are all the women in the FBI so powerful now? However, despite his surprise, the bald white man quickly raised his pistol and pulled the trigger at Chenier. Chenier jumped from the gallows to a movie prop that looked like a door behind the gallows a second before the other party fired. Bang, bang, bang. The bald white man fired 3 shots in a row. Because of the distance and speed, Chenier successfully dodged 2 bullets, and the 3rd bullet hit her right foot. Chenier frowned, endured the pain, and rolled on the ground, hiding behind a movie prop that looked like a door. Seeing this, the bald white man cursed and walked quickly to the gallows. He fired 3 or 4 shots at the movie prop where Chenier was. As a result, the movie prop fell down, and Chenier's figure disappeared. This damn cousin. The bald white man's face became even uglier. He turned his head and saw Cooper, who was still struggling with the rope beside him. Seeing that the bald white man focused his attention on himself, Cooper's mouth twitched, stopped moving, and slowly showed a stiff smile on his face. We can talk about the conditions. Talk about %hash. The bald white man's face became even more angry when he heard this and immediately raised the pistol in his hand towards Cooper. Chapter 379, Battle in the Factory, Extra Gains. The moment she saw the bald white man raise his pistol, Chanel, who had moved to the other side behind the movie props, suddenly shrank. The pistols on the two people were taken away by the bald white man's men and placed on a wooden box not far away. Chanel originally planned to quickly get back from behind the movie props, go around the wooden box, to retrieve the pistol and fight back against the bald white man, but she was shot in the right foot and was forced to slow down. Now the other party aimed the pistol at Cooper. Chanel immediately stopped, picked up a prop like a plate from her side, and threw it hard at the bald white man. At the same time, Cooper saw the bald white man raising his pistol to attack him. A cold light flashed in his eyes. With the help of his tied and hanging hands, he suddenly jumped up, raised his legs, and kicked the bald white man with all his strength. Bang! The plate thrown by Chanel successfully hit the bald white man, causing him to pause. Cooper's kick was blocked by the bald white man's hand. Although he took a few steps back, he did not fall down. The pistol was still aimed at Cooper's chest. The bald white man sneered and immediately pulled the trigger in the face of Cooper's frown and Chanel's angry eyes. Bang, 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 bang. Several gunshots rang out in the center of the warehouse. The next second, Cooper fell to the ground with his buttocks, and he was not shot. Under Chanel's surprised eyes, the bald white man fell to the ground with blood on his body and a puzzled look on his face. Looking at the bald white man who fell to the ground, Cooper picked up the pistol that the other party dropped on the ground and quickly looked in the direction where the gunshots came from. Chanel also cast her eyes in the direction where the gunshots came from. What caught their eyes were Roan, Winslow and Anwar. Roan was still holding the pistol, and it was obvious that he was the one who had just fired the gun. Unlike Chanel and Cooper who didn't see what happened just now, Winslow and Anwar had been by Roan's side and clearly saw all of Roan's actions just now. When the three arrived here, they saw the bald white man about to pull the trigger. Winslow and Anwar immediately prepared to deal with the bald white man, but Roan had already pulled the trigger before them. Roan fired 4 shots in a row, and 1 bullet successfully broke the rope that bound Cooper's hands. The rope broke, and Cooper sat on the ground. The other 3 bullets hit the bald white man's right hand, left arm and left leg, causing the bald white man to miss a shot and then fall heavily to the ground. Roan's superb and accurate shooting skills and extremely fast reaction speed made Winslow look incredible, and Anwar was also moved and took a breath. But now is not the time to ask Roan how he practiced to this level. Winslow and Anwar, who are rich in tactical literacy, suppressed their shock in their hearts, raised their weapons and quickly walked to the middle-aged white man, took out handcuffs and controlled him. Roan nodded in satisfaction at Winslow and Anwar's actions, put away his gun, and looked at Cooper and Chenia, asking, "Are you alright?" Cooper quickly got up from the ground, shook his head and thanked, "I'm fine, thank you, team leader Roan." "Yeah." Roan answered casually, then looked at Chenia and learned that she was shot in the right foot. He immediately called the SWAT team to help her stop the bleeding and carried her to the hospital with the bald white man in the ambulance and sent Lassie with a gun to follow. 5 minutes later, the entire warehouse was processed and the SWAT team escorted a group of people into the car. Roan leaned on the new sub with his arms around his arms and watched the scene. Seeing Cooper coming over after finishing, he asked directly, "What happened today?" The doctor that Chenia and I found must know something about this serial murder case. Hearing Roan's question, Cooper immediately frowned and explained what happened. As a clinical respiratory stimulant, the share of nicothamide used by hospitals from month to month generally does not fluctuate too much. However, the usage of naproxen in this hospital in the XC district of Los Angeles has not fluctuated significantly in the past 3 months, but the usage records of some of them are much more vague than before. Cooper and Chenia immediately realized the problem and began to investigate. When they received the call from Roan notifying them to return to the special investigation team, they had already found 3 suspects directly related to naproxen. One of them is a doctor named Nekmi. When he faced Chenia and me, he lied. Cooper said that he and Chenia had received internal training from the FBI and knew some routine methods to distinguish whether others were lying. He continued, when Chinia and I were questioning the second suspect, we saw Nick Me going downstairs and driving away, so we immediately drove to follow him. The situation after entering the alley was the same as Winslow and Anwar had speculated before. When the two were about to catch Nick Me, a group of guys with guns rushed out of the sewer and surrounded them. The two were outnumbered and were forced to capture him. Cooper didn't see the scene of Annie throwing her phone, so he didn't mention it. Luo An's eyebrows moved slightly when he heard it, and he continued to ask, what are the identities of the bald man and these guys? Without waiting for Cooper to answer, Winslow and Anwar came over with several transparent bags containing green balls. Handing the bag to Luo An, Anwar grinned and said, we found these things in several small movie props. We just dismantled several large movie props and found a lot of OxyContin and a lot of drugs similar to oxycodone in them. Looking at the marijuana leaf balls in his hand and hearing Anwar's words, Luo An was speechless. If I guessed correctly, they seemed to have found a criminal gang that used movie props as disguises to smuggle a large amount of addictive drugs privately. Doctors in the Federation have been abusing addictive opioids for a long time. Many patients who have been taking this kind of drugs for a long time have only two ways to go after becoming addicted. Either continue to take this kind of drugs or take something more addictive, such as white flour or white rock sugar. The Federation is a free capitalist country. If there is demand, there will naturally be supply. Even compared to the smuggling of white flour, smuggling opioids is a lucrative blue ocean industry. There is also an unexpected gain. After returning the transparent packaging bag to Anwar, Roan called Michelle and asked her to come to the scene with the Trace Inspection Department agent. Such a large batch of goods is worth a lot of money, and the special investigation team will also be able to obtain a lot of extra gains afterwards. No problem. Michelle just nodded in agreement, and Mona's voice suddenly came from the other end of the phone. Roan, Lassie asked me to check the doctor named Nick Me before, and I found that he has a big problem. Roan was not surprised at all. Since the bald man and his gang were engaged in drug smuggling, it was normal for Dr. Nick Me, who was obviously connected with the bald man, to have financial problems. No, that's not what I'm talking about. Mona on the other end of the phone shook her head and explained, I found in Nick Me's spending records over the past 3 months that he has bought disinfectants containing sodium hypochlorite many times. But in the surveillance footage of Nick Me's community, I have never seen him take disinfectant home. This is strange, isn't it? Luo An grinned when he heard this and immediately took Cooper's phone and called Lassie. Lassie, where is the doctor I asked you to catch before? Chapter 380, Interrogation in the Hospital. Luo An uses his poisonous tongue skill again. Lassie was sitting in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. Hearing Roan's question, Lassie explained, I'm sorry, I didn't find the doctor when I arrived at the hospital. Lassie said that, when she arrived at the hospital, she heard the story of the doctor leaving the hospital on the pretext of something urgent, and then 2 FBI agents chased after him. The 2 agents were obviously Chinia and Cooper. Cooper went on to say that when the group surrounded him and Chinia in the alley, Dr. Nick Me briefly spoke to one of the guys whose left and right eyes were different sizes, and then entered the sewer and left them from a certain intersection. But I also got some clues. Lassie on the other end of the phone added, I asked the doctor's home address and interpersonal relationships in the hospital, and submitted all these clues to Mona. Hearing this, Luo An raised his mobile phone again. Mona, how are you doing? Michelle has written a wanted order for Dr. Nick Me for you. As long as you authorize it, it can be officially issued immediately. There was a crackling sound of keyboards on the other end of the phone, followed by Mona's voice. In addition, I have been looking for this doctor, but his car is now parked at the entrance of the alley and has not moved yet, which means that the doctor has abandoned the car. I used the surveillance video to check the recent itinerary of the doctor's car and found that he often went to a certain area in northern Los Angeles during this period. There are no real estate or relatives of the doctor in that area. However, there are very few surveillance cameras in that area in northern Los Angeles, and I haven't found out where the doctor has gone yet. Michelle, immediately issue a wanted order for Dr. Nick Me within the major law enforcement departments in Los Angeles. Then bring people to the warehouse to deal with the scene. Luo An thought for a while and said, Mona, you and Patricia continue to search for the doctor's whereabouts. Contact me as soon as you find him. Okay. No problem. Michelle and Patricia both nodded and agreed, but Mona was a little confused. Aren't you going back to the special investigation team? No, I'll take people to the hospital. Roan looked up at the criminal gang that was taken into the car by the SWAT team members and said, the big bald guy may know where the doctor went. After hanging up the phone, Roan returned the other phone to Cooper and waved his hand to signal Cooper to get in the car. The warehouse was temporarily controlled by Winslow and Anwar. After Michelle arrived here, the two of them would come to the hospital to find Roan. Several people began to act according to the order. Cooper sat in the co-pilot of the SUV and was shocked by the way Roan drove. Looking at the scene of the car speeding backwards outside the window, Cooper's heart, which had been hanging when he was pointed at by a gun, jumped to his throat again. Cooper, with a trembling face, felt a sense of security while holding the safety belt tightly tied to his body. He swallowed a little saliva and asked, Captain Roan, will issuing a wanted order for the doctor alert the murderer behind this case? Yes, so I only ask Michelle to issue this wanted order within the major law enforcement departments in Los Angeles. Roan nodded and answered Cooper's question. From the descriptions of Cooper, Mona and Lassie, it is highly unlikely that Dr. Nick Mee is the murderer of this serial murder case. He does not have the ability and characteristics that a murderer should have. Issuing a wanted order for the doctor on a large scale to the people of Los Angeles is likely to cause the murderer to kill the doctor. Issuing a wanted order within the law enforcement department will reduce this probability a lot. The ambulance with the bald white man Creed, Chenia, and Lassie set off first, but less than 5 minutes after the ambulance entered the hospital, Roan and Cooper also arrived at the hospital in SUV. Creed and Chanel both had ordinary gunshot wounds. The experienced doctors in the operating room were used to it. It didn't take long for them to remove the bullets and treat the wounds. Creed, a bald white man, was a little pale due to excessive blood loss, but since he hadn't fainted, it was nothing serious. So when Creed was pushed out of the operating room and entered the ward, he was surrounded by Roan, Lassie, Cooper, and Chanel in a wheelchair. Creed on the bed was trembling. He glared at Chanel and Cooper, looked up at Roan, and asked in a hoarse voice, "Don't waste your time on me. I won't say anything. Don't get me wrong. What I asked has nothing to do with those movie props." Roan laughed and pulled her chair over to sit down. He just asked Chanel about her experience while being tied up. "I found something was wrong," Chanel explained to Roan's question. "I tried to test Creed, and judging from his words, Creed thought we were here to investigate him. Because of this, Creed wanted to know how far the FBI had found out about the smuggling, so he didn't kill Chanel and Cooper right away." Sitting next to the bed, Roan poured a glass of water, but instead of handing it to Creed, whose lips were dry, he raised his head and drank it himself. Then, with a smile on his face, Roan briefly told Creed about the serial murder case, as well as the relationship between the case and Dr. Nick Mee. Finally, Roan patted Creed on the shoulder and said with a smile, "It is obvious that, in order to escape our pursuit, Nick Mee not only used you, but also sold you, your men, and your business. How many goods are there in those movie props? How much did you lose this time? Can you tell me, so that I can broaden my horizons?" After listening to Roan's words and seeing the uncontrollable smiles of Lassie, Chanel, and Cooper, Creed's originally pale face turned red with anger. His face was as ugly as it could be, and his lips trembled with anger. Seeing this, Roan hurriedly poured a glass of water for Creed, but did not feed it to him immediately. Instead, he smiled and asked, "How is it? Do you know where Nick Mee will hide? Or, can you contact Nick Mee? Give me my phone number." Looking at the water cup in front of him, Creed was silent for a long time, licked his cracked lips, glared at Roan fiercely, and said in a hoarse voice, "Let me make a call. I have a way to find that damn Nick Mee through the Los Angeles underground world. But I also have a request. I want to get a reduced sentence. Happy cooperation." Roan nodded with satisfaction, handed the water cup to Creed, and then turned around to signal Lassie to hand her mobile phone to Creed. He did not return Creed's own mobile phone to prevent him from making trouble. In response to Creed's dissatisfaction, Roan simply spread his hands, indicating that the mobile phone had been broken in the previous battle and could not make calls. Creed snorted coldly and did not comment. He took Lass's phone, punched in a few numbers, and said to the other end of the phone, "It's me, Creed. Find that guy Nick me as quickly as possible." After saying this, Creed hung up the phone without waiting for a response from the other end. Cooper frowned slightly when he saw this. Lassie and Chanel remained calm. Roan took Lass's phone back to his own hands and started chatting with Creed, who looked unhappy. Time passed by minute. More than 10 minutes later, Lass's phone rang again. Roan did not hand the phone to Creed, but directly pressed the answer button to turn on the speaker and looked at Creed with a smile. Creed's face was full of dissatisfaction, but he still pinched his nose and swallowed his breath and asked, "Where is the person?" Chapter 381. Successful arrest. Truth of the case. 30 silver coins. He's left Los Angeles. The person on the other end of the phone replied, "The person you're talking about is fleeing straight south along Highway 19 in southern Los Angeles." Creed glanced at Roan and said through gritted teeth, "Thank you." As soon as he finished speaking, the person on the other end of the phone hung up. Roan immediately threw the phone back to Lassie, stood up and said to Lassie and Cooper, "Immediately contact the LAPD in the southern part of Los Angeles, send them Nick Me's photo, and ask them to intercept Nick Me. Lassie, Cooper, you, Winslow, and Anwar, drive to chase Nick Me immediately." "Understood. No problem." Lassie and Cooper immediately turned around and left the ward after hearing this. Roan also took out his cell phone and told the other people in the special investigation team the news. As for Chenia, Roan looked back at Creed lying on the bed, walked out of the ward, and called 2 SWATs to ensure the safety of the place, then patted Chenia on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Cred still has a lot of things in his hands. The task of interrogating him is handed over to you. Try to clarify the smuggling matter." Chenia looked up in confusion. Didn't Roan agree to Creed's commutation conditions just now? Roan spread his hands. "That was Creed's condition for helping us find Dr. Nick Me. What does it have to do with the crime of smuggling?" Seeing Roan's reasonable and well-founded appearance, Chenia, who had always had a cold face, flashed a light in her eyes, slowly revealed a smile, and nodded heavily to agree. "No problem." After learning the direction of Dr. Nick Me's escape from Roan, Mona soon found the trace of the other party driving away under a false identity on a highway in southern Los Angeles. The model and specific appearance of Nick Me's car was sent to LAPD, and LAPD quickly located him. With the joint efforts of Winslow, Anwar, Lassie and Cooper, more than 2 hours later, they successfully captured Dr. Nicky on a highway in southern Los Angeles. The 4 members of the special investigation team lost some bullets, several stun grenades, and the front of an old SUV was damaged in order to stop the other party. As for Dr. Nicky, he was shot several times because of resisting with a gun and resisting arrest, and was sent to another hospital for treatment. Still not giving Nicky much time to react, he was just pushed out of the operating room and entered the ward, and Roan walked in with Lassie holding a cup of coffee and smiled. "It's not easy to see you, Mr. Nicky." Nicky is a middle-aged white man with a slicked back hair, no beard on his face, and looks very clean. At this time, Nicky's face was a little pale. Hearing Roan's words, he smiled bitterly and did not answer. "As a doctor, I believe you must be aware of the customs in federal prisons." Sitting down next to the bed, Roan took a sip of coffee and asked directly, "I won't waste time. Tell me, what is the matter with this serial murder case? Who is the murderer? Where is he?" The air in the ward was quiet for a long time. Finally, Nick Me slowly exhaled and whispered, "I don't know their real names." "Then just say the names they told you." Lassie's eyes lit up. Roan waved his hand nonchalantly and said, "A professional painter will come here later. You can describe their faces then." "Okay." After pondering for a few seconds again, Nick Me whispered, "Those 2 people are a couple. The man is named Mike and the woman is named Mary." "Couple." Lassie was a little surprised. Roan's expression did not change when he heard this. He nodded and said, "Continue." Nick Me said that he met a girl 2 years ago. When he went out with the girl, he was dragged to an underground place by the other party. At first, Nick Me thought it was some bar or entertainment venue, but when he got there, he found out that it was actually a crazy church that believed in the original Christian doctrine, and the girl was a believer of this church. The male leader of the church, Mike, claimed that he was the reincarnation of Jesus, and the female leader, Mary, was the reincarnation of Mary. They believed that they could enter heaven and gain eternal life after the world was destroyed. X2 Lassie was speechless, and Luo An also grinned and asked, "Do you believe it?" "Of course I don't believe it." Nick Me shook his head repeatedly. How could he, who had been to college and received professional training, believe in this underground cult? That night, in order to ensure his own safety, he participated in the ceremony held by the other party. The next day, he wanted to break up with the girl and never see her again, but he didn't expect Mike and Mary to suddenly come to the hospital where he worked. Nick Me was shocked at the time, but Mike and Mary were very kind. After chatting with them several times, Nick Me finally figured out their purpose, which was to buy some psychedelic drugs from Nick Me. Nick Me knew how Mike and Mary were going to use these drugs. At first, Nick Me agreed to their request for his own safety. After a while, Nick Me's mentality changed a lot when he saw the accumulated wealth. Luo An nodded slightly in his heart. It seemed that the drug smuggling with Creed and his group started from here. After thinking for a while, Luo An asked, "What's the matter with this serial murder case?" "Because Mary has cancer." Hearing Luo An's question, Nick Me showed a complicated look on his face and said, "Half a year ago, cancer cells were found in Mary's body. Since then, I found that Mike and Mary were crazy. They actually began to really believe that those doctrines were useful and that they could achieve eternal life in the form of souls after death by killing other people." The mentality of Mike and Mary at this time was similar to that of a founder of Apple who always went to a certain country to worship Buddha after he got cancer. Luo An could guess it. Lassie also understood this, but she felt very unhappy about one thing, that is, in order to continue to make money from Mike and Mary, Nick Me never called the police. Disinfectants and other items were also purchased by Nick Me according to Mike's request. After finding out the location of the underground church in the area where he sent disinfectant from Nikki, Ron immediately left the ward and asked Winslow, Anwar and Cooper to investigate separately, and asked Lassie to take 2 agents to Nikki's home to deal with relevant evidence. "We must hurry up and catch Mike and Mary. First, the couple has been acting faster and faster recently. If we delay for too long, someone else will surely fall victim to their murder. Second, Nikki mentioned that Mike and Mary started to act half a year ago, but the earliest death found by the special investigation team was only 20 days ago. Who knows how many more deaths have not been found." Not long after Ron returned to the special investigation team, the portrait artist sent over the images of Mike and Mary as described by Nick Me. Mona logged into the FBI internal database and quickly found the true identity of Mike. She looked up and said, "Gerald Morris, a deceased agent of Customs and Border Protection, CBP, died in a border operation involving Mexico 6 years ago. As for Mary, she has not been found yet. Give me some time. The file says deceased, but she is not dead." Standing behind Ron clasped his arms and narrowed his eyes slightly. With this kind of death and resurrection situation, I understand why he claimed to be the reincarnation of Jesus. Mona looked at the photo of Gerald. A hint of disgust flashed across her face, and at this moment, her cell phone suddenly rang. It was Lassie on the other end of the phone. She said in a hurried voice, "Mona, tell Ron quickly that I found 30 silver coins in Nick Me's living room." Mona was slightly stunned. 30 silver coins, that's the money Judas got for betraying Jesus. Fouquet. Ron's mind raced. He cursed under his breath, quickly took out his cell phone, and called the 4 SWAT team members who were guarding Nick Me at the hospital, and rushed out of the special investigation team office with his equipment. Chapter 382 Discovery and Battle in the Hospital. On the streets of Los Angeles, and Sav was speeding forward like lightning. Ron put down his phone and controlled the steering wheel to overtake the car in front, and he breathed a sigh of relief when he heard Judas' name and the 30 silver coins. Ron immediately guessed that the murderer, Gerald Morris, who called himself Jesus, had regarded Nick Me as a traitor, Judas, and planned to get rid of him. Fortunately, Ron just contacted the 4 SWAT agents in the hospital who were responsible for guarding Nick Me, and they did not find any abnormalities, which means that Gerald Morris had not started yet. After steering the SUV to turn right onto another road, Roan thought for a moment and called Mona. Mona, Gerald Morris's wife, how is the real identity of Mary being checked? In the Federation, I only found a few fake identities that Mary got with money. But I just checked the information records of the Federal Customs and Border Protection Bureau and found her true situation. Mona on the other end of the phone stretched her body and looked at the computer screen and said, the other party is not from the Federation, but from Mexico, and her name is Catarina Hidalgo. There is no record of her mother, and her father is a drug lord in a city very close to the Federation. Her brother has been engaged in the flower business with his father since he was a child. The operation that Gerald Morris participated in was a conflict with the drug trafficking gang headed by Catarina's father. The Customs and Border Protection Bureau showed that Catarina had died in the war, and I couldn't find out how she met and fell in love with Gerald. However, the two people who were lucky enough to survive the war, a man and a woman, still have hatred for each other. I already have a movie plot and picture in my mind. After this case is solved, let's go to the theater to watch a movie together. Roan answered Mona casually. After hearing Catarina's nationality, he figured out another reason why the other party killed people according to the conditions of the 12 disciples of Jesus. The main religion in Mexico is Catholicism, accounting for about 80% of the national population. Catarina is probably also a Catholic. It is normal for Gerald to be infected by her and start to believe in religion. The SUV arrived at the hospital soon. Roan walked to the ward where Nickme was. A nurse was about to change his dressing. The nurse was the same one that Roan and others had seen when Nickme came out of the operating room. Roan frowned slightly and stretched out his hand to stop the other party. Wait a minute. The nurse paused with a puzzled look on her face. Seeing the 4 SWAT team members change their expressions and hold their weapons, she was immediately shocked. It's okay, don't be nervous. Luo An waved his hand. A sunny smile appeared on his face, took the medicine bottle from the nurse, and asked with a smile, did you prepare this bottle of medicine yourself just now? The nurse breathed a sigh of relief and shook her head. No, my colleague prepared it. Then please prepare another bottle yourself. Luo An still smiled and walked out of the ward with the nurse. The nurse had worked in this hospital for more than 10 years, so she naturally guessed what Luo An meant. Her heart skipped a beat, but she didn't say much. She took Luo An to the room where the nurse prepared medicine. There was nothing unusual in the dispensing room. The nurse prepared another bottle of medicine as usual in front of Luo An. Walking out of the dispensing room, the nurse, whose mood had returned to normal, asked as she walked, Mr. Agent, can you tell me a little bit about the case of the person in the ward? Luo An laughed. A case related to murder. The nurse rolled her eyes when she heard this, and when she was about to continue talking, she suddenly found that Luo An took out an object from his waist, opened the door of the dressing room next to the dispensing room, and threw it in. You. The nurse's pupils shrank when she saw this, and just as she said a word, she was pushed to the ground not far away by Luo An. Boom. The next second, a deafening explosion suddenly sounded, and the glass of the dressing room door was instantly shattered. The nurse hurriedly looked up and found that Luo An rushed into the dressing room like a cheetah. On the way to the hospital, Luo An had been thinking about how he would kill Nickme if it were him. There were 4 SWAT members in and outside Nickme's ward. The success rate of pretending to be a doctor to enter the room or directly forcing in was too low. The bed where Nickme was lying was in the corner of the ward, and there was no suitable field of view for long-range sniping. After much thought, Roan found that the only way to tamper with Nickme's medicine was to have the highest success rate. From the moment he entered the hospital, Roan turned on the emotional perception in his mind. There was no problem with the SWAT team members and nurses along the way. Only when he passed the dressing room did Roan feel a deep malice. Sure enough, as soon as Roan rushed into the dressing room, a sharp white light quickly slashed towards his neck. He hurriedly dodged the dagger sideways and prepared to shoot at the other party. The other party suddenly crossed the dagger to push away the pistol and slashed at Roan's right hand holding the gun. Judging from the sharpness of the dagger, if it hit, the right hand would probably be cut off on the spot. After taking a quick look at the middle-aged white man in front of him, who had a cold face, a big hooked nose, and a white coat that he got from nowhere, and looked exactly like the one in the photo of Gerald Morris. Roan snorted in his heart, crossed his pistol to block the attack, and took out a dagger from his leg with his left hand, and stabbed at the other party fiercely. Snap. Gerald Morris's reaction speed was also very fast. He immediately raised his other hand to hold Roan's left hand, and while his right hand continued to hold the dagger to Roan's neck, he also raised his knee to hit Roan's abdomen fiercely, but Roan blocked it and fought back. On the other side, in the ward, where Nickme was not far away, 4 SWAT members heard the explosion, and the 2 standing at the door immediately rushed to the direction of the dressing room with guns. "Don't move. Put your hands up." The moment the 2 SWAT members ran to the door of the dressing room and shouted with guns raised, Roan just pulled a little distance away from Gerald. With a sneer, Roan held Gerald's waving arm with the pistol in his right hand, grabbed the dagger and suddenly slashed at Gerald's wrists with his backhand, and at the same time, he quickly pulled the trigger of the pistol with his right hand. Bang, bang. 2 bloodstains flew out from Gerald's left and right wrists. 2 gunshots splashed blood on Gerald's shoulders and chest. Before the other party could react, Roan raised his right foot and kicked Gerald's chest hard. Bang. Gerald, with a painful expression on his face, flew backwards and hit the 2 SWAT members heavily. He put away his dagger and walked out of the dressing room. Luo An looked disdainful and said coldly, "This is the hospital." Handcuffed him and sent him to the operating room. Oh, and the bottle of medicine that was wasted just now, he will be held responsible. Understood. The 2 SWAT agents, with eyes wide open and faces full of shock, nodded quickly and rushed forward, handcuffed Gerald tightly, and pulled a medicine delivery cart to push him towards the operating room. The 2 SWAT agents saw clearly that the gunshot wounds on Gerald's chest and shoulders looked serious, but they would not cause death. The really serious part was Gerald's 2 wrists. Luo An cut the tendons of his hands twice. If nothing unexpected happened, Gerald would not have the opportunity to continue to play with daggers and kill people in the future. Ding ling ling. Selectively ignoring the nurse's rapid breathing and constant glances, Luo An took out the ringing cell phone from his pocket. "What's the matter?" "Good news." It was Mona's voice on the other end of the phone. She smiled and said, "We found Mary." Chapter 383, Case Finale, Truth. Other victims. Earlier, according to Roan's order, Winslow, Anwar and Cooper went to investigate the location of the underground church in the area where Nikki delivered disinfectants and medicines. Because Mary had cancer, the underground church had been abandoned for a long time, and the 3 did not find any useful clues. However, in the area where Nikki delivered disinfectants, Winslow found a suspicious car in the camera of a store. The car appeared every time after Nikki delivered something, and the car left there not long after Nikki left. Winslow felt that the car was suspicious, so he asked me to check it. Mona on the other end of the phone explained. While typing on the computer, I checked the car and found that the other party used a fake license plate. The surveillance on the road showed that the car eventually lost its trace in the southern part of Los Angeles. Winslow, Anwar and Cooper immediately went to the southern part of Los Angeles to investigate. With the help of LAPD, they quickly found the owner of the car, the female owner of a bakery. After some inquiries, they learned that the female boss would occasionally lend the car to her best friend. After seeing the photo of the female boss of the bakery taking a meal with her best friend, Winslow and the other 2 found that the best friend was Mary, who was dressed up. Well done. At the door of the operating room, Luo An sat on a chair, looking at the red light above, and nodded with satisfaction. Let Winslow and the others bring the person back. Okay. Not long after Mona hung up the phone, the lights in the operating room were turned off, and Gerald was pushed into the ward. Luo An was sitting in the hospital, waiting for the news of Winslow's action, when Chanel suddenly called Luo An. Team leader Luo An, I have already found out. Chinia's characteristic cold voice came from the other end of the phone, and there was a faint curse from a man in the background. Credit has explained the source and route of the smuggled drugs, which law enforcement officers he bribed, the identity of the buyers, etc. In addition, I also asked where Creed's hidden warehouse is located. Luo An's mouth twitched. He really didn't expect Chinia to ask so many things. Some of them were beyond his expectations. Hearing the noisy sound in the background of the phone, Luo An raised his eyebrows and asked, "Is Creed okay?" Turning his head, he looked at Creed lying on the bed, his lips trembling, his face red and purple, and he kept greeting others. He looked like he was about to faint from anger. Chinia shook his head calmly and said, "It's okay. Creed is very cooperative and his emotions are very stable." After Chinia's voice fell, the background sound in the phone became even noisier. Luo An praised Chinia a few words and hung up the phone. After a few seconds of silence, he suddenly laughed. These new agents brought him a lot of surprises. He never expected Chinia to be a bit treacherous. Not long after, Winslow received the news that Mary was successfully captured. Winslow, Anwar and Cooper were not injured. The mission plan was a complete success. Not only that, Winslow also found a key to a rental warehouse in the house where Mary lived. Opening the door of the rental warehouse, Winslow found a full 19 glass bottles inside, each of which contained a tongue that had been treated with antiseptic treatment. Jesus. Gift crab. What the fouquet? The next day, at 9 o'clock in the morning, in the office area of the special investigation team, everyone was shocked when they saw the 19 tongues that Winslow brought back. Lassie covered her mouth and exclaimed, "So, Gerald and Katerina killed 19 people in the past few months. We have only found 5 now, and there are still 14 victims in Los Angeles that have not been found." Mona, Michelle, Patricia, and Chinia, who was sitting in a wheelchair, all looked very ugly, although they had caught the murderer of this case. "No, it's 12. Roan walked out of the team leader's office, raised the folder in his mobile phone, and said, "This is the list of victims that Winslow found in the rented warehouse. Because a religious ceremony of calling out names will be needed at that time, the murderous couple wrote down the names of all the victims. Among the 12 disciples of Jesus, one disciple named John survived and died of natural causes. So the murderous couple just dug up the graves of 2 people named John who died of natural causes and took the tongues of the 2 Johns from the bodies." From the records, Katerina and Gerald's original idea was to kill 24 people who met the 12 disciples of Jesus and give each of them half. When Katerina dies of cancer, Gerald will follow her, and with the company of the 24 disciples' tongues and several candles, the 2 of them will become immortal demons and stay together forever. XN. After listening to this weird love story and thinking of the scene described by Luo An, all the agents in the special investigation team's office felt goosebumps on their bodies. Everyone, now that the case has been solved, the murderer has been caught, and the evidence is solid, we should move on to the next step. Roan opened the folder and distributed the papers with the names of the victims to the detectives, saying, "Lassie, Patricia, Cooper, Anwar, the 4 of you should hurry up and find the bodies of the 12 victims. Chinal, Winslow, Michelle, Mona, the 4 of you will be responsible for handling this serial murder case and the subsequent procedural issues of the smuggling case." "Understood. No problem." All the detectives nodded in agreement, and Roan nodded with satisfaction. When everyone set out to work, Roan took the case report he had written overtime last night and went to the office of the team leader. After listening to Roan's description of the case, Potent Burn's face suddenly darkened. He never expected that a murder case involving the Speaker of the Parliament would lead to the discovery of such a murderous couple. "The nature of this case is very bad. I need to hold a press conference." After reading the case report written by Luo An, Potent Burn raised his head and asked, "As the main person in charge of the case, you must participate this time." After a moment of silence, Luo An slowly nodded, but he also had a request. "I will only answer questions related to this case. I will not answer other questions involving myself or other cases. At the same time, I will also publicly state that I will not accept media interviews alone. As a grassroots detective in the past, premature contact with the media were definitely causing inconvenience to work, so Luo An refused to attend press conferences with Verena several times. Now Luo An has been promoted to the head of the special investigation team under different identities. If he still refuses to participate in the press conference, the more he covers up, the more he will attract the attention of those reporters who will think that Luo An has big news. Instead of letting a bunch of reporters keep a close eye on him in the future, it is better to attend the press conference openly. Without suspense, the group of reporters who only pay attention to the news will not be very interested in him. Okay. Potent Burn nodded and agreed to Roan's request. The two continued to chat for a few more words, and Roan took the initiative to get up and leave the team leader's office. Back to the special investigation team, Roan immediately waved and called Michelle into the team leader's office. Next to him, Mona was about to ask Roan something. Chapter 384, Harvest from the Smuggling Case, Dinner. Special Investigation Team, Team Leader's Office. The team leader's office is no longer as clear as it was at the beginning. Desks, computers, chairs, bookcases, small sofas and other items have appeared in the room. There is also a green plant in the corner of the room that Luo An doesn't know the name of. Because of the lack of water for a long time, it has become very withered and yellow. Luo An himself prefers to be tidy, so the documents on his desk are very neat. When there is no case, Luo An pours himself a cup of tea, turns on the computer, crosses his legs, logs into the online forum to post and chat, and starts to slack off openly, as if to take revenge. But today Luo An did not slack off. He called Michelle into the team leader's office to ask about something important. Michelle, have you counted the gains from the smuggling case? We have already checked it out. Michelle nodded suddenly, tilted her head and thought for a while, and replied, in that warehouse, we seized a total of 370 kilograms of marijuana, 90,000 OxyContin tablets with a dosage of 10 milligrams each, 110,000 OxyContin tablets with a dosage of 80 milligrams each, and 190,000 Tylenol tablets containing oxycodone, with a total value of about $14 million. In addition, the warehouse that Janelle asked about from Creed also contained a small amount of marijuana leaves, a large amount of OxyContin and other tablets, with a total value of about $10 million. Luo An's eyes lit up. As mentioned earlier, the FBI regulations stipulate that the investigation team that solves such cases can get a certain percentage of rewards afterwards. The risk factor of unique drug cases is high, at 14.5%, while the proportion of smuggling cases is slightly lower, at only 9.3%. Luo An is now in 2005, and there is still more than a month before 2006. The wholesale price of a bottle of OxyContin tablets containing 10 milligrams per pill is nearly $100. The highest dosage of 80 milligrams per pill costs $600 or $700 per bottle. The price is very high, but at this point in time, OxyContin is still a painkiller myth on the federal market. It is not strictly regulated, and the law does not regard it as a highly addictive unique product. It was not until 2016 that OxyContin was pulled down from the altar and regarded as an opioid containing opium ingredients, which is both a medicine and a drug. Therefore, the batch of pills seized by the special investigation team this time can only be counted as an ordinary smuggling case and cannot be counted as a unique product smuggling case. Luo An pulled out a calculator and did a simple calculation. The special investigation team's subsequent gains from this smuggling case were about $2.23 million. Michelle turned and left the team leader's office. Luo An sat on the chair and cursed the shameless pharmaceutical groups in the federal government. Then he took the documents and started to deal with the follow-up work of the two cases. After officially becoming the leader of the special investigation team, Luo An had to take charge of a lot more work. Luo An could throw other ordinary work to other people in the special investigation team, but things related to power and money had to be handled by Luo An himself. Time passed by minute, and soon it was time to get off work. Musso BBQ restaurant. Cheers. Cheers. At a long table deep in the restaurant, 9 people from the special investigation team raised their glasses and drank together. Luo An took a big sip of beer and said with a smile, "Everyone has worked hard these days. Let's eat more barbecue tonight. I'll treat you." "Thank you, team leader Luo An." When Luo An finished speaking, the eyes of the agents lit up, and the scene suddenly rang with noise. There were a lot of women at the table, and Winslow, Anwar and Cooper couldn't fit in, so the three turned around and started chatting with Luo An. Cooper was younger, not much different in age from Roan, and the topic they chatted about was always cars. Winslow and Anwar talked about shooting and fighting with Roan. The scene in the sewer where Roan killed 3 enemies in an instant left a deep impression on them, and Winslow and Anne were always wanted to know how Roan did it. It's actually very simple. Hearing this question, Roan forked a piece of barbecue into his mouth and smiled and answered, "I'm just a little faster than them and a little stronger than them." Roan thought he was very clear, but Winslow and Anne were all upset. The two looked at each other. This was a restaurant, not suitable for shooting competition, so Winslow picked up his glass and drank it all, looking at Roan proudly, saying that he wanted to arm wrestle with Roan to compete in strength. Winslow and Anne had already competed privately, and the two were evenly matched. In the end, Winslow relied on his own longer strength to slightly suppress Anwar. As for Cooper, although he also has a lot of muscles, his strength can only be considered average. The muscles he has trained are more for picking up girls. Okay, no problem. Seeing the expressions on Anwar and Cooper's faces, as well as Winslow's provocative eyes, Roan swept away the barbecue on the plate and nodded without hesitation to agree. Seeing this, Anwar and Cooper immediately got up and left the table to prepare a suitable place for Roan and Winslow. Mona, Lassie, Chinelle, and Patricia next to them were also attracted by the actions of the 4 men. Turning around, they found that Roan and Winslow were preparing to arm wrestle to compare strength. Mona immediately lost interest and turned back to continue discussing the new women's clothing and cosmetics in Hollywood with Patricia. Lassie was not interested in arm wrestling between men. She looked at Winslow with amusement and leaned over to Chinelle again to chat with her in a low voice. Patricia and Chinelle were a little curious about this competition. While chatting, they also watched the scene and wondered how long Roan could last in Winslow's hands. Soon, Roan and Winslow sat down face to face. Cooper sat beside them to help them clean up the food on the table, and were acted as a temporary referee, covered Roan and Winslow's clenched right hands, confirmed that they were ready, and said, 3, 2, 1, start. As soon as the voice fell, Winslow's arm instantly exerted force, ready to find out the upper limit of Roan's strength first, and then knock Roan down. What shocked Winslow was that as his strength continued to increase, he found that he still couldn't find out Roan's bottom. Until Winslow used all his strength, the veins on his arm bulged. Roan's face was solemn, but his arm was still straight, without the slightest crooked. Roan was a head shorter than Winslow, and although he had muscles, they were not as big as Winslow's, but now the two were evenly matched. Seeing this scene, Anwar, Cooper, Chinia, and Patricia all stared with wide eyes. Just as the 4 people began to guess how long Roan could hold on, Winslow's eyes suddenly turned red, and he grabbed his thigh with his left hand, because he found that Roan actually began to increase his strength, and pressed his hand down. Bang! A few seconds later, in the shocked eyes of Cooper, Chinia, and Patricia, Winslow's right hand was pressed down on the table by Roan's right hand. Okay, the game is over. Before Winslow could react with shock on his face, Roan pulled out his right hand, pushed a large glass of beer in front of Winslow, and laughed loudly. "You lost. Drink." Winslow, who was absolutely confident in his strength, had a face full of disbelief. After reacting, he picked up the large glass on the table and drank it all, then stretched out his left hand to Roan and shouted, "Continue. This time we compete with the left hands." Roan raised the corner of his mouth slightly, glanced at the 3 large glasses filled with beer beside the stunned Cooper, and asked with a smile, "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 385, Candidate, John Rodriguez's Request. After a moment, Winslow looked at his left hand that was pinned down by Roan on the dining table, and fell silent for a moment. Anwar, Cooper, Chinelle, and Patricia's faces were filled with disbelief, and their eyes, when they looked at Roan, all changed. They never expected that Roan's strength was even greater than Winslow, who was the strongest among them, and Roan seemed to be able to do it with ease. Roan, who drank a bottle of physical potion every day after getting up, and a bottle of strength potion every few days, smiled and said nothing more. He pushed the 3 glasses of beer in front of Winslow, and picked up another small glass himself, Drink. Drink. Winslow looked at Roan with deep admiration, first stretched out his right hand and gave Roan a thumbs up, then picked up the 3 glasses of beer on the table, drank them 3 times in a row, and then chatted with Roan again. With Winslow's gesture of admitting defeat, the atmosphere on both sides of the table became lively again. The dinner lasted until 10 o'clock in the evening. Everyone was drunk and couldn't drive, so they used various means to take a taxi or ask friends to take them home. Winslow, Anwar, Cooper, Chanel, and Patricia were only temporarily seconded to the special investigation team in this case. On the 3rd day after the dinner, they returned to their original departments, and the special investigation team's office area returned to its original empty appearance. These 5 people performed very well in this case, and Luo An would not do anything to kill the donkey after it has done its work. On the day when the 5 people returned to their original departments, Luo An distributed the bonuses they should have received for solving the case. So, on Friday, just after work, in the office of the team leader, Potent Burn looked at Roan, who was sitting at his desk, and asked with a smile, "Which of these 5 people do you plan to transfer to the special investigation team?" Roan laughed and handed the report he had written to Potent Burn. Potent Burn opened the folder, which contained 2 names, Cheney and Winslow. Only these 2 people. Potent Burn took a quick look and closed the folder and asked with a smile, "The special investigation team has 7 people. Even if these 2 people are added, your special investigation team will only have 6 people. Enough." Roan shook his head. For a special team like the special investigation team, the quality of the agents is more important than the number. Roan himself is in charge of the team, strategizing and unraveling the clues of the case. He is the brain of the special investigation team. He thinks he is the face of the special investigation team. Mona is responsible for computers, investigating case clues through the internet, and the internal network information security of the special investigation team. Lassie is responsible for offline investigation of clues. Her disguise skills, investigation ability, physical fitness, and reaction speed to emergencies are all excellent. Michelle is responsible for the follow-up procedures and documents after the case is over. She has some knowledge of computers and can assist Mona. She also has good information processing and identification capabilities and coordination and support capabilities. She can assist Lassie and Roan and is a qualified logistics support staff. Chanel has been working in the international business department. Her adaptability, body, and gun skills, interrogation and counter-interrogation capabilities are all very outstanding. Needless to say, Winslow, who came from the hostage rescue team, is an absolute elite. His ability, spirit, thinking, experience, etc. are not comparable to ordinary agents. When Chanel, Winslow, and Lassie go out to perform investigation tasks, once they encounter emergencies, their safety will be greatly improved. Okay. Potent Burn nodded and agreed to Roan's request for people, but it would take some time to go through the procedures. Winslow and Chanel would not be able to officially join the special investigation team for at least 2 weeks. This time didn't matter to Roan. Anyway, he was not in a hurry. Back at the special investigation team, Roan found that only Mona and Michelle were in the office area, so he asked in confusion, "Where is Lassie?" Michelle looked up from her desk and replied, "Lassie asked me to ask you for leave. She is not feeling well and has gone to the hospital." Roan frowned. "What is the specific situation?" Michelle shook her head. "I don't know. She didn't say in detail." "Okay." Roan nodded, motioned Michelle to call Lassie later and tell her that she didn't have to go to work today. He gave Lassie a day off and then turned back to the team leader's office. After the dinner the night before, the former CIA and current group president John Rodriguez came to the special investigation team again at noon yesterday. John Rodriguez didn't keep it a secret this time. He came to Roan with only one request, which was to ask Roan for help and introduce him to Mr. Clement. Roan guessed the situation John Rodriguez was facing. It must be Wanda and others from the CIA who began to use John's current identity as the president of the Mueller Group to ask him to use the resources of the Mueller Group to help the CIA do things outside the Federation. Now that John Rodriguez has left the CIA, he only wants to ensure that his daughter can smoothly inherit a complete and wealthy Mueller Group. Using the Mueller Group to work for the CIA will be exposed one day, and no one can predict what will happen to the Moolah group at that time. As a former CIA insider, John knows that he can't compete with Wand and others alone, and the only way is to hold on to another thigh. Roan's thigh has a promising future, but it has not yet fully developed, and is not big enough. Varine's is not enough to satisfy John's needs. The only thigh that can meet John's needs is Mr. Clement behind Varine's. Roan thought about it, and did not refuse John Rodriguez's request. First of all, this matter is not difficult for Roan, and he can also have a good relationship with John. After all, John is now a wealthy man who controls a large group. Even if there is no Roan's path, it will only take some time to take the path of others. Secondly, although doing so will make the CIA unhappy, the CIA will only be unhappy with Roan, and will not attack Roan who has a background and connections. Thirdly, John Rodriguez was willing to pay Roan $2 million for this matter. It was not that Roan liked money, but he admired John, who was a man who could do great things, and was willing to help him. After Roan's introduction, John took the time and restaurant location set by Mr. Clement's secretary, grinned and thanked him repeatedly, and left the special investigation team. What happened next had nothing to do with Roan, and he was not interested in what conditions Clement and John would reach. After collecting the check left by John, Roan took a sip of the teacup, turned on the computer, and began his daily life of slacking off. During this period, Roan called a high-end Western restaurant and booked 2 seats for Saturday night. He also bought 2 movie tickets and planned to go and relax with Mona that day. The main reason was that Roan didn't know why Mona always had a little temper these few nights. While tossing around like crazy, even if she was too tired to move, she was still stubborn. But it did bring some new experiences to Luo An. Just when Luo An was daydreaming, a familiar voice suddenly came from outside the team leader's office. After opening the door of the team leader's office, Luo An found that Lassie had returned to the special investigation team, and she even had some injuries on her face. Chapter 386, The Wound on Lassie's Face. News about Mona's father. Special investigation team, office area. The injury on Lassie's face was not serious, and she even used makeup to cover it up. Unless someone paid special attention, ordinary people could not see the marks on Lassie's face. However, there were no ordinary people in the special investigation team. Mona, Michelle, and Roan all quickly discovered the cover-up Lassie made on her face. Mona quickly moved her chair to Lassie's side and asked with concern, "What's the situation? What happened to you last night?" While speaking, Michelle wanted to pull Lassie to sit on the chair, but Lassie hurriedly stepped back to avoid Michelle's hand. Mona and Michelle then discovered that Lassie's arm was also slightly injured. Seeing that Roan, Mona and Michelle all looked at her, Lassie smiled awkwardly. It's okay, I just accidentally bumped into it while driving last night. I just need to rest for a day. Your excuse is as poor as if you were walking on the road and accidentally fell." Roan poured a cup of coffee and handed it to Lassie, smiling. "I remember you left with Chinia yesterday. You didn't attack Chinia, did you?" Roan didn't know Chinia's sexual orientation, but because of the international business department, Chinia's spirit and senses were very sensitive. If Lassie really took advantage of Chinia's drunkenness last night to touch her, she might really be beaten by Chinia's subconscious reaction. Not Chinia. Lassie shook her head repeatedly. She always played the role of the main attacker when getting along with the same sex. After learning about Chinia's amazing performance in the warehouse, she simply compared her skills with Chinia and found that she was unlikely to beat her. Chinia's personality is also quite strong. When the time comes, I'm afraid they will fight over who is on top. Lassie can't beat her, and she doesn't want to be on the bottom, so she lost interest in Chinia. Seeing the curiosity in Roan, Mona and Michelle's eyes, and the intention of not giving up until she finds out the reason, Lassie's mouth twitched, and she was silent for a few seconds, and whispered, "Okay, this is an accident." Lassie said that she met a female college student majoring in acting at a university in Los Angeles in the bar last night. The experienced Lassie quickly returned to the other party's university dormitory with the other party, ready to return to college. In the dormitory, Lassie and the female college student played a game that the acting major is good at. As a result, the other party's acting skills were too superb and accidentally caused the rumor to learn some women's self-defense and fighting skills to misunderstand. Under the influence of alcohol and the need to not be distracted at the critical moment, Lassie didn't react at all. Roan, Mona and Michelle rolled their eyes, turned around and left together, leaving Lassie aside, and selectively ignored Lassie's subsequent words of help for some trivial matters. The day of the special investigation team ended with a lot of play and fighting. The next 2 days are Saturday and Sunday, and Michelle will buy some fast food and go home to read as usual. Lassie went straight to the bar as usual, even though her right arm was inconvenient and could not suppress a restless heart. She still had her left arm. Because of the busy cases these days, the rental house has not been cleaned up. Mona drove her car home first. Luo An finally left the special investigation team and used the public car for private use to start the SUV to go to a large supermarket to buy ingredients. Since he came to this world, Luo An has never eaten hot pot. He plans to have a big meal tonight to satisfy his craving. The supermarket Luo An went to is a large membership supermarket in Los Angeles. The membership card was not applied by Luo An on his own initiative, but it was one of the convenient small gains he got after the First Lady bombing, like the lifetime discount or free hotel room. The variety of meat and seafood in the supermarket is very rich and complete, and Luo An bought a lot. There are not few types of vegetables, but not many either. Luo An only picked some of the types that Mona likes to eat on weekdays. Then they bought a shabu shabu hot pot. Luo An drove to a Chinese store and bought 2 kinds of hot pot bases, spicy and non-spicy. After dinner, the two of them had some entertainment activities. It might not be very convenient to eat a spicy food in the rental house. Mona looked at the boiling shabu shabu hot pot and a lot of ingredients, tilted her head in confusion. Is this hot pot? Yes. Have you eaten it before? I ate it once in Chinatown with a few classmates when I was in college. It was very spicy. Mona's face showed a lingering fear when she talked about this. My stomach felt uncomfortable for a long time after eating it. So I made 2 flavors today. You can eat the non-spicy one. Luo An prepared the dipping sauce and handed it to Mona and picked up a piece of meat from the non-spicy grid and put it in Mona's bowl. After taking a bite, Mona's eyes lit up. It's not spicy and it tastes good. Here are some seafood I prepared. You can try it. Okay. Eating hot pot is naturally not suitable for drinking red wine. Luo An and Mona chatted while drinking beer. During this time, Mona also tried to eat a few bites of the food in the hot pot, and her ears turned red and her heartbeat accelerated, which made Luo An's lips dry. After eating the hot pot, the two simply cleaned up the table. When Luo An opened the window to dissipate the smell, he hugged Mona and sat on the sofa, resting quietly together and watching the program on TV. Snap. Suddenly, Mona grabbed an uneasy hand on her body and threw Luo An a pair of white eyes. Luo An chuckled and was about to turn up the volume of the TV program when Mona suddenly stood up from his arms and looked at Luo An seriously and said, Luo An, I received a message before that my father will probably return to the Federation in a month. Hearing this, Luo An's somewhat restless heart instantly cooled down, and he was a little confused. I remember you said before that your father would return to the Federation in 6 months, didn't you? At that time, Luo An and Mona were still in New York, and now only 2.5 months have passed. Why didn't he tell me that the time would be advanced? Mona shook her head. She didn't know what the reason behind it was. She told Luo An about this to ask Luo An what she should do. She hadn't seen each other for many years. Her mother died alone without anyone to accompany her, but her father had never stopped giving her money on time for many years, so that she could go to college. These things made Mona have complicated feelings for her father, and she didn't know how to face him at all. Luo An reached out and hugged Mona back into his arms, whispering to comfort Mona. At the same time, his expression was a little strange. In his 2 lives, this was the first time that Luo An had to face his girlfriend's father. It would be a lie to say that he was not nervous, but he was extremely nervous, and not to the point of fear. In short, his emotions were quite complicated. Because of this incident, Luo An and Mona lost interest tonight. They lay in bed and hugged each other and slept quietly all night. The next day, Saturday, seeing that Mona was in a bad mood and absent-minded, and was listless when washing, Luo An directly took her to the Los Angeles Disneyland, walked through various areas inside, from opening to closing, and had a crazy day. In the evening, the two watched a movie in the cinema, and then went to the restaurant that Luo An had booked before, resting and enjoying the food. A few hours later, in the apartment under the night, Mona pushed Luo An to the sofa, grabbed Luo An's collar, raised her chin and looked down, and asked proudly, "Tell me, what crime have you committed?" Looking at his handcuffed hands, Luo An grinned. Chapter 387 Mona's Conversation, Harvest, New Case. On Sunday, Mona, feeling the sun, grumbled a few words with an unhappy face, and pulled the quilt to cover her head without opening her eyes. "It's time to get up." Luo An pushed the door, and walked into the room, put a glass of water on the cabinet next to the bed, pulled the quilt off Mona's head, and said with a smile, "If you don't get up, your dinner will be gone." "I don't eat breakfast, I'll eat at noon." Mona reluctantly took back the quilt, and covered her head again. After a few seconds, she suddenly lifted the quilt, and asked in confusion, "Dinner?" "Yes, dinner." Luo An stepped aside to make way, and the familiar sun appeared in front of Mona. But unlike before, the sun today was not on the left side of the window in the room, but on the right. Seeing the sun clearly on the west side of the sky, Mona suddenly sat up, with a face full of shock. "How come it's night? I slept all day." "Get dressed, wash up, eat, and change the sheets later." Luo An laughed, put the water cup in Mona's hand, brushed away some messy hair, and kissed Mona on the face gently, then turned and walked out of the room. Mona, who had just woken up, was a little slow in thinking. She subconsciously took a sip of the water cup, and then reacted and looked down at the sheets in Luo An's mouth. Seeing the lotus pond moonlight on the sheets, Mona's face turned red, and she finally remembered what happened last night. "Fouquet." Cursing in a low voice, Mona quickly got up, and walked to the bathroom. After getting out of bed, she felt her noodle-like legs, and Mona cursed even louder. While washing, Mona's mind was full of doubts. Didn't the books and computers say that the man must be the one who loses the battle in the end? Why is it the other way around for her? Mona was thinking about it while washing. At the same time, Luo An was sitting at the dining table eating quietly. He looked as if nothing had happened, but the movements of raising his legs from time to time to adjust the trajectory still showed that Luo An was far from being as calm as he appeared on the surface. Physical potions can make Luo An energetic, and increase his physical fitness and endurance little by little, but it will not change the composition of human muscles. Strength can be increased, time can be increased, but wear and tear cannot be repaired, and hemostatic potions do not care about this. A few minutes later, Luo An finished his food, and sat on a chair to rest. Mona finished washing, and walked to the dining table. After sitting down, she stared at Luo An with gritted teeth, knocked on the table fiercely, and said viciously, "Luo An, we need to talk." Huh? Luo An was stunned. This sentence was a little familiar. He seemed to be often seen in some American TV series. Bang! Seeing Luo An stunned, Mona knocked on the table again, and repeated what she had just said. Luo An spread his hands. "Okay, what do you want to talk about?" "About the time issue." Mona said with a serious face that the war last night was wrong. It was the oppression of women by men and tyranny. Luo An's mouth twitched when he heard this. "It's obviously you." "Stop." Luo An's words were interrupted by Mona's angry hand. Luo An didn't listen to the principles Mona said next, but focused on the system interface in his mind. Luo An successfully solved the missing case and the serial murder case. The system evaluated him as excellent and extremely excellent respectively, and opened a total of 9 treasure chests. At this time, Luo An's system warehouse page had Hemostasis Potion X6, Antida 4 Potion X5, Swiftness Potion X3, Strength Potion X1, Sensitivity Potion X2, Analgesic Potion X5, Featherfall Potion X3, Physical Strength Potion X9, Sleep Potion X2, Aqualung Potion X2, Weakness Potion X2. Luo An's desired Danger Sense Potion was not opened. He always wanted to know if the emotional perception in his mind would change after taking this bottle of potion. Bang, bang, bang. At this moment, the sound of Mona knocking on the table reached Roan's ears, and at the same time, Mona's questioning voice, Roan. Roan. Did you hear me? Roan came back to his senses and nodded subconsciously. I heard it. I heard it. What did I just say? I think what you said makes sense. I agree very much. Roan Greenwood. The next day, Monday, in the office area of the Special Investigation Team, Winslow and Chenia were still going through the procedures and had not yet arrived at the Special Investigation Team. At this time, Michelle, Lassie and Mona were sitting together in boredom in the office area. Michelle, who had a relatively normal life and work schedule, was in high spirits, and Lassie's facial injuries and arms had healed a lot, but I don't know what she went through over the weekend, and now she is a little listless. Mona slept all day yesterday and couldn't sleep at night. She only managed to sleep for 3 hours in the early morning. Now she is a little sleepy and not very energetic. However, when they started talking about the new women's clothing and newly launched cosmetics in the Grove shopping center near Byville, Mona and Lassie immediately became excited. Michelle, who was not particularly concerned about these things, said, "Good morning, everyone." At this time, Luo An pushed open the door of the Special Investigation Team and walked in, raised the folder in his hand, and said loudly, as expected, "There is a new case. Michelle, Mona, you to investigate the victim's financial situation and the surveillance video near the victim when he was killed. Lassie, come with me to do an outreach." "Okay, understood." The black sub drove forward quickly. Lassie sat in the co-pilot, looked at the information in the folder, frowned and said, "At 2:30 a.m. on Monday, in room 1196 on the 11th floor of a hotel, Los Angeles Judge Taylor Davis was shot in the head by a sniper rifle at a long distance while having sex with a girl named G. The victim, Taylor Davis, is 46 years old, a newly promoted judge, with a wife and a son. The girl named G at the time of the incident was Samia, 26 years old this year. The LAPD records that she has been working in the industry for 3 years." Luo An nodded. "The murderer used a sniper rifle, so the case was handed over to us. Another guy who cheated on his wife." Looking at the photo of the middle-aged white man with his hair combed meticulously, Lassie sneered, turned the page, and began to read other information. Soon, the sub arrived at the hotel where the crime occurred. Roan shook hands with the LAPD sheriff who was guarding the scene. Under the guidance of the sheriff, he met a young white woman with a nervous face. Lassie recognized that the woman was Samia, the woman who had committed the crime, but why was there a white young man hugging her tightly? "I'm Samia's boyfriend." Hearing Roan's question, the white youth Spike quickly stood up and answered, "I can guarantee that Samia has nothing to do with this case." "Okay." Lassie and Roan looked at each other, and Lassie pointed to the scene behind her and asked uncertainly, "You know what Samia did here last night, right?" "I know." Spike nodded. "I was waiting for her downstairs at the time. We have booked a restaurant, and when she is done, we will go there to eat together." After chatting for a few more sentences, Roan and Lassie learned that Spike and Samia had known each other for 5 years. They were both Christians, and had never done anything between lovers. The two agreed to save their first time for their wedding night. Lassie froze in place. Roan was silent for a few seconds and whispered, "So, you haven't done those things until now?" Spike's eyes were a little erratic when he heard this, and he answered, "Not really. I had something with my uncle, but I have almost forgotten it." Roan and Lassie. Chapter 388, Case of Judge Being Sniped During Hotel Movement. Monday, 9 a.m., room 1196 on the 11th floor of a hotel. This room is a common suite in the Federal Hotel. 2 LAPD officers stand at the door of the suite, and several FBI agents are working inside the room. On the big bed in the bedroom, there lies a naked middle-aged white body. The cause of death is a bullet wound on the victim's head. There is not much blood on the bed, but there are a lot of yellow and white things on the sheets, which looks very visually impactful. There is a very clear bullet hole next to the glass not far from the big bed. The agents of the trace examination department use technical means to quickly locate the location where the murderer fired the gun, the 14th floor of the high-rise office building diagonally opposite the hotel. In the bedroom, a group of trace examination department agents are handling the scene in an orderly manner, and the air in the corner of the living room outside is extremely quiet. After listening to Spike's narration, even Lassie, who was born and raised in the Federal, felt that the amount of information was a bit too much. Luo An was even more impressed in his heart. The Federal is indeed the beacon of the world. The 2005 version is so much ahead of other countries. Luo An also suspected at first that Spike was a pimp and that Samir was just one of his prostitutes. However, after calling Mona, he learned that Spike's identity information showed that he was just an ordinary office worker who went to church every week, had saved some money in his account, and even booked a wedding hall with Samir a year later. There was nothing wrong with it. After hanging up the phone, Luo An looked at Spike with admiration. Since Spike couldn't get any clues, Luo An turned his attention to Samir, who witnessed everything at the crime scene last night and kept a clear distinction between public and private. I was shocked. In response to Roan's inquiry, Samir took the tissue handed by Spike, adjusted her mood and answered, "Taylor is my old customer. He called me yesterday afternoon to arrange this room and time. After arriving here, we drank a little bit of wine to cheer ourselves up, and then..." Pause. Samir. Roan hurriedly stopped Samir's detailed description of what happened last night. It was not because he was embarrassed, but because Spike, her boyfriend, sat beside her and listened nonchalantly. This scene was really shocking. Roan's version had not been upgraded to this point, so he said, "Samir, you can just describe the moment when the crime happened. In addition, how is the victim Taylor Davis feeling today? Is there any difference in his behavior?" I was downstairs when the crime happened. Before I could react, I heard the sound of glass breaking, and then I found that Taylor was motionless. Samir then said that she was shocked and quickly ran off the bed and lay on the ground behind the bed. She was panicked and nervous and called Spike downstairs for help. Spike helped her call the police. As for Roan's next two questions, Samir said that Taylor Davis was no different from before and did not mention anything about work. Even the whole process and posture were exactly the same as before. Nothing new. Both Spike and Samir showed a hint of disdain in their eyes. "Okay, thank you." Roan's mouth twitched, nodded, and left the living room with Lassie. The LAPD waiting nearby saw this and took the two away from the scene. After all, Samir was engaged in the work of helping others physically. Although she was praised for calling the police and could be exempted from imprisonment appropriately, she still had to pay the fine. Samir and Spike should have nothing to do with this case. Lassie, who was also amazed, shook the phone in her hand and said, "Michelle found the surveillance video at the hotel in trance when the crime happened. Spike was indeed waiting in the car and never got out of the car." Roan raised his hand and rubbed his temple with a complicated expression. It wasn't because they were worried about not getting any clues, but because Spike and Samir regarded this as a normal work and their values of distinguishing between public and private were a bit advanced. Luo An admitted that he was lagging behind and needed to slow down. Team leader Greenwood. At this moment, an agent from the trace examination department came over with a transparent packaging bag in his hand, which contained a bullet stained with a lot of red and white. "This is the murder weapon we found in the bedroom." Luo An took the bullet handed over by the other party and looked at it, frowning slightly. "This is a .338 Lapua Magnum bullet." "That's right." The agent of the trace examination department nodded. "One of the most common sniper bullets on the market, suitable for many types of sniper rifles." Luo An returned the transparent packaging bag to the agent of the trace examination department. Lassie glanced at the building in the distance and asked, "Have you checked the location of the sniper?" "My two colleagues have been there." The agent of the trace examination department replied, "Based on the sniper rifle ballistics test, my colleagues determined that the location where the sniper fired was the corner of the stairs on the 14th floor of the office building. But unfortunately, there is no surveillance camera there. The murderer took away the bullet casing after firing a shot, and nothing was found at the scene. Thank you, and thank you for your hard work. Please let us know in time when the bullet's ballistics report is completed." "Okay, no problem." There was nothing useful found at the crime scene, so Roan and Lassie went to the office building opposite the hotel and walked around the place where the murderer fired the gun. They also didn't find any useful clues, so they drove back to the special investigation team. "Can you two beautiful ladies tell me any good news?" Pushing open the door of the special investigation team, Roan looked at Mona and Michelle and asked with a smile, "Lassie and I have gained nothing this time, but we have learned a lot." "Learned a lot? What do you mean?" Mona asked casually, then moved her chair back a step, looking at the computer and said, "Judge Taylor Davis' personal financial situation is good, and his family's financial situation is also fine. Among the couple's loans, except for the college loan, the car loan and the mortgage were all paid off a year ago. Now their accounts are poorer than mine." Sure enough, even for a judge, it's not easy to pay off the college loan quickly. Lassie took a sip of coffee and complained speechlessly. She also had an unpaid college loan. Michelle next to him continued, "Judge Taylor Davis' son is still in school, and his wife will arrive here soon. She is not in Los Angeles for the time being, but is on a business trip to Texas." Roan walked to Michelle's side, bent down and took a look at the photo of Taylor Davis' wife on the computer. She was a middle-aged white woman wearing glasses, and was very charming. Her name was Heather. Roan asked, "What is a possibility that this case is related to Heather? A murder of passion? Jealousy? Revenge? I don't know, but the probability should not be high." Mona pulled up Heather's personal information, consumption records, and itinerary records for the past year on the computer desktop and said, "Heather has been to Texas on business trips many times in the past year, and has stayed in hotels many times. There have been many other men staying in the same room with her, but there is no record of Heather and Taylor quarreling or having conflicts. I suspect that the two of them are very likely to have an open marriage that is different from each other." 6. Roan, who was several steps behind, was a little speechless. He swallowed the desire to complain in his mouth and asked, "How is Judge Taylor Davis' work? Has he offended anyone, or had conflicts with anyone in his recent work?" Chapter 389 The Murderer's Target, the victim's wife, the suspect. Tyler Davis has only been a judge in Los Angeles for 6 months. He is a new judge, and has not handled many cases. Mona pulled out the cases that Taylor Davis had handled since he became a judge. There were all kinds of cases in the case. Roan took a quick look and could see that Taylor Davis had good legal literacy. Judging from the records in the file alone, the decisions made by Taylor Davis were basically in compliance with federal law. However, Roan was just a bystander and did not know the inside story of those cases. He knew that in these cases, there must be some eyewitnesses who were dissatisfied with the judge's decision. Luo An thought for a while, walked to the front of the office area, wrote and drew on the whiteboard, and said as he wrote, "According to Samia's description, when Taylor Davis was shot, she was stunned on the bed for a long time. 5 or 6 seconds later, she screamed and ran off the bed to hide on the ground. This period of time was enough for the sniper to fire another shot to kill Samia, but the sniper did not. Instead, he directly put away his gun, picked up the shell, and left the scene. The murderer's target was very clear, that is Taylor Davis. The reason why he didn't kill Samia was either because he was in a hurry to leave the scene, or he felt that there was no need to kill Samia and was too lazy to do so." Lassie thought about it and added, "There is another possibility. The sniper was sympathetic to women and didn't want to kill Samia. There is a chance, but it's not high." Luo An nodded, looked at Mona and Michelle, and added, "The murderer's sniping level is very high. He is either a professional killer or a veteran. He must have experience in this field." Mona, Michelle, you two should check the cases that Taylor Davis handled during his lifetime and see which of the parties involved in the cases, their relatives and friends, meet the conditions I mentioned. "Okay, no problem." Mona and Michelle immediately agreed to start working. At this time, the landline phone next to them rang. Lassie answered the call and said a few words, then turned back to look at Luo An. "Taylor Davis' wife is downstairs. Okay, you take the trouble to bring her up." Luo An stood up and walked to the meeting room to wait. 5 minutes later, Heather, who was wearing a women's suit, gold-rimmed glasses, and had a curvy figure, and the whole person had the charm of a mature woman, walked into the special investigation team office area. As expected of Luo An, Heather's face, except for the fatigue of the journey, did not show the kind of sadness and grief that the wife would show on her face when she learned of her husband's death in other cases. Heather was very calm. She was not angry after hearing that Taylor Davis died in bed. She was silent for a few seconds, opened her handbag, took out a women's cigarette, looked at Luo An and asked, "Is it okay?" "Go ahead." Luo An raised his hand to indicate that it was okay. Lassie next to him took out a pen and began to write and draw in a small notebook. After finishing a lady's cigarette, Heather picked up the coffee on the conference table and drank it all in one gulp. She leaned back and crossed her legs and said in a rather cold tone, "Many people die from gunfire in the Federation every year, but very few die from sniper rifles. I didn't expect Taylor to be one of them. Unexpected things always happen in life." Seeing that Heather's mood was quite stable, Roan stopped talking nonsense and asked directly, "Has Taylor Davis been threatened by anyone recently?" "I don't know. I haven't received any threats." While speaking, Heather took out a key from her handbag and put it on the conference table, then pushed it towards Roan with a little force. "This is the key to our house. Taylor's computer and personal belongings are in the study, and a small part is in the bedroom. You can take them all away for investigation." Holding the key sliding on the conference table, Roan raised his eyebrows and said, "In most federal cases, when one spouse dies, the other is a certain suspect. I wonder what you think of this, Ms. Heather?" Heather looked at Roan with interest, took out another women's cigarette from her handbag, took a puff, and then answered, "Obviously, I'm the small part you mentioned. I know that Taylor is looking for women outside. We discussed this before we got married. I can't meet his needs, and he can't meet my needs. Instead of quarreling and torturing each other after marriage, it is better to set conditions in advance and let go. Taylor and I have a good relationship. We can help each other in work and interpersonal relationships. He needs me, and I need him. Marriage is just a way to strengthen the connection between us." Roan's eyes twitched. He really didn't expect that the word good relationship would appear in the adjective of the relationship between husband and wife. Roan and Lassie then asked some questions, and Heather did not hide anything. She answered all the questions openly and positively. Her attitude was very good. She was the most cooperative person Roan had met in such a long time. A few minutes later, Heather asked, "Are there any other questions? If not, can I leave? I need to go to school to see my son first, and then I need to go on a business trip to other states, and some work has not been completed yet." "No problem please, but keep the phone open at any time." "Okay." After getting Roan's affirmative answer, Heather got up from the chair, took her handbag, and walked out of the special investigation team, and made a phone call in the corridor. It was not difficult to hear from her words that the topic was related to her work. Looking at Heather's vigorous back, Lassie was shocked. Roan thought for a while, turned back to look at Mona, and asked, "By the way, did Heather and Taylor buy each other a high-value personal safety insurance?" "No." Mona shook her head, saying that she had checked before, and the two did not have such insurance, but their son had a personal accident insurance with a compensation amount of 1 million, and the beneficiaries were the couple. "Shocked me." After listening to Mona's description, Roan's expression remained unchanged, and Lassie breathed a sigh of relief. If the insurance compensation for their son exceeded 3 million, Lassie would suspect that the reason behind this case was that Heather hired someone to kill Taylor first to prevent the other party from sharing the money, or stopping her from killing her son, and then killed her son to defraud the insurance money. Roan looked at Lassie with a strange expression, and Lassie raised her eyebrows. "What's wrong? This Miss Heather is obviously a person who is more rational than emotional. If she encounters an unsolvable problem, I will never be surprised that she can do such a thing. Maybe." Roan did not argue with Lassie about this matter. He had a similar judgment on Miss Heather. She was very rational, direct, resolute, extremely self-centered, did not care about other people's eyes, had her own values, and believed in them. Throwing the key that Heather had just given him to Lassie, Roan signaled her to take a few trace examination agents to Heather Taylor's house to take back Taylor Davis' computer and other useful items. Lassie turned and left. Roan walked between Mona and Michelle and asked, "How is it? Did you find anything?" Mona nodded and put a headshot and identity information of middle-aged white man on the computer screen. "According to your requirements, I found a suspect. Coincidentally, he happens to own a gun shop. Roan bent down and saw the name of the suspect mentioned by Mona in the case related to the other party handled by Taylor Davis, Abed, the kidnapping and murder case of his daughter. Chapter 390, Wildcat Bullet, Talents in Prison. Special Investigation Team, Office Area. Kidnapping case. Roan asked with narrowed eyes, what happened specifically? Abed's daughter is a college student, just an adult. Mona tapped the keyboard a few times, retrieved the case file from the legal system, and replied, one night a few months ago, Abed's daughter was kidnapped on her way back to the university dormitory after finishing her part-time job. The other party only wanted money at first, but when he saw that Abed's daughter was pretty, he had other ideas. 40 hours after the incident, the Special Victims Service Department found Abed's daughter. She had many scars on her body and her mental condition was not very stable. In court, the lawyer produced a test report that the murderer had inhaled flour and had mental problems at the time of the incident. Judge Taylor Davis did not agree to Abed's request for the other party to be sentenced to death or life imprisonment, but only sentenced him to a few years in prison. After listening to Mona's narration and seeing the information records of Abed's daughter's psychological counseling experience for several months in the computer, and that her mental state has not recovered so far, and she even dropped out of college, Roan sighed in a low voice, an angry father will do anything for his daughter. Michelle nodded, and Mona pursed her lips and said nothing. At this moment, the landline phone next to her suddenly rang. Michelle picked up the phone and answered a few words, then hung up the phone and turned back. The trace examination department said that the ballistic test report and the crime scene report of this case have been completed. The autopsy report will take some time. I will go downstairs to get them back. Okay, thank you for your hard work. Michelle turned and left. Roan patted Mona on the shoulder and walked to the equipment room on the side. Come on, Mona. Come with me to talk to this father. Abed's gun store is located in the southern part of Los Angeles. The gun store is very large and the decoration is also very direct and rough. As soon as Roan opened the door, he saw several rifles pointing at him. The owner of the gun store, Abed, has a face full of flesh, is very tall and strong, and he doesn't look like a guy who is easy to mess with. FBI. Facing the clerk who came up to ask if he and Mona needed anything, Roan directly took out the FBI's golden badge and showed it to the other party, then selectively ignored Abed's unfriendly look, walked up to him and said calmly, hello, Mr. Abed, we need to talk. Mona glanced at Roan calmly. Abed stared at Roan with wide eyes for a few seconds, then snorted coldly and threw the gun he was wiping to the clerk. Turned and walked to a room at the back of the gun store. Let's go there to talk. Don't affect my business. In the room for people to rest temporarily, Abed poured himself a glass of water and drank it all. He didn't mean to pour for Roan and Mona and asked directly, what do you want to see me for? I have something to ask. Looking at the dirty cup, Roan gave up the idea of pouring himself a glass of water and asked, where were you this morning? I was sleeping at home. Abed's mind worked quickly. After answering the question, he immediately thought of a lot of things. He leaned forward and looked at Roan with a serious face and said, I don't know what case you have encountered again. Those things have absolutely nothing to do with me. Okay. Roan nodded. On the way here, Mona had been checking the surveillance records of Abed's community. It did show that Abed had been with his wife and daughter since he returned home and had never left the house. So far, Abed's suspicion can be temporarily ruled out, and Roan and Mona don't need to come to this gun store, but later they received a new message from Michelle. Roan took out a photo from his pocket. The photo showed the bullet head left at the crime scene. Michelle said that according to the test of the trace examination department, they can be sure that this is a processed Wildcat bullet. Wildcat bullet is a homemade bullet made by federal shooting players. It is generally made by modifying existing commercial bullets. The purpose is to optimize the performance of the ammunition, such as higher kinetic energy and straighter flight. There are many people who can make this kind of bullet, and the gun store owner is definitely one of them, especially Abed has been in the gun store for more than 10 years. Our records show that Mr. Abed has participated in the Los Angeles Gun Association and gun shows 6 times, and even served as a judge on bullets once. Roan handed the photo to Abed and said calmly, "I believe you can tell who did the trick on this bullet, right?" "Sorry, I'm old, I can't tell." Abed took the photo and glanced at it. In less than a second, he handed the photo back to Roan and replied, "Can you leave now?" Roan, who had been observing Abed carefully, clearly saw the unnatural expression on the other party's face when he checked the bullet in the photo, so Roan did not take the photo back, but took out a business card from his pocket with a phone number on it. "We know about your daughter. This is a foundation that specializes in providing assistance to special victims. Your daughter's situation is completely within the scope of help of this foundation. I think you may need it more." Roan had asked Mona to check the murderer who hurt Abed's daughter before, and he was indeed a bad guy. But Roan is now a law enforcement officer after all. He can't give the prison administrator's contact information of his daughter's murderer to Roan, just because he sympathizes with Abed. Abed is a stranger to Roan. Once this kind of thing is done, it will leave a handle for those who want to investigate. Roan and Abed are not related, so it is impossible for him to do this. However, within the scope of conditions, it is okay to help Abed's daughter. An innocent young girl should have a better life, and should not be ruined by this incident. At first, Abed was full of anger when he heard Roan mention his daughter, but when Roan finished speaking, Abed fell silent instantly. In order to solve his daughter's mental problems, Abed has spent a lot of money. In the near future, he may have to sell this gun store. After a long silence, Abed seemed to collapse, no longer as stiff as before, and whispered, "I'm sorry, I'm really sorry." While apologizing, Abed turned the photo in his hand over, took out a pen, wrote a line of letters on it, and finally stuffed it into Roan's arms, sighed and whispered, "This is the name and address of that guy. If you encounter other things in the future, I will do my best to cooperate with you. I'm sorry, I apologize to you for my behavior and words just now." Looking at the old father in front of him who was worried about his daughter, Roan did not mention what happened just now. He gave the foundation's contact information to Abed, took back the photo, and handed it to Mona. After a brief chat with Abed, he took Mona out of the room and walked towards the SUV, ready to use the laptop to check the other party's identity information. In the passenger seat of the SUV, Mona quickly found the person, based on the information on the back of the photo. Hex Lawrence, 43 years old, was in and out of prison many times when he was young, and is now the organizer of a gun club in Southeast Los Angeles. Another prison talent. Looking at the chubby middle-aged white man in the photo, Roan started the SUV and drove towards Southeast Los Angeles, then asked, "Is there any connection between Hux or Hux's family and friends and Judge Taylor Davis?" Chapter 391 Club, committing suicide out of fear of crime. The SUV was driving fast on the streets of southern Los Angeles. Mona's 10 fingers tapped on the laptop for a while, frowning slightly, from the basic information of Hux and Taylor Davis. "I didn't find any connection." "Then don't check it for now." Turning the steering wheel and driving into another road, Roan smiled and handed Mona a bottle of water, saying, "We are about to reach the club. Let's talk to Hux first. I believe he will choose to cooperate with us like Abed and tell us who bought the bullets from him." "Maybe," Mona replied to Roan casually, still focusing on the laptop in front of her. Since Hux himself could not find any clues, Mona began to focus on the members and guests inside the gun club. 3 minutes later, the SUV successfully arrived at the door of the club. It was already afternoon at this time. Roan and Mona had not eaten lunch yet. After getting off the car, the two went to a fast food restaurant not far away to buy some hamburgers and cokes. After eating and drinking, they entered the club. Bang, bang, bang. Just after entering the hall, Roan and Mona heard a burst of muffled gunshots from deep inside the club, followed by some female cheers and male cheers and laughter. Roan looked around. The decoration style of the club was more outdoor, giving people a jungle feeling. There were many places for people to rest. There were some delicious food and juices next to it, but no alcohol. A very interesting club. Pinching the soft plush toys on the chairs and the counter, Roan looked at Mona's glowing eyes and couldn't help but grin slightly. The owner of this club is a wonderful person. The main target of the other party is obviously female customers, and this is shown in the details everywhere. Compared with men, The connection between women and guns in the past was not close, but with a continuous increase of feminist voices in recent years, the connection between women and guns has also slowly increased. With the gradual increase of female customers in the club, how could there be fewer male customers? The laughter between men and women deep in the club is enough to prove this. Hello. Seeing Ron and Mona push the door together, a very young girl immediately came up to ask them if they needed any help, and then pretended to introduce the content of their club to them. FBI. Ron laughed and took out the golden badge to interrupt the other party. I'm looking for the boss of your club, Hux. The moment she saw the golden badge, the waitress was stunned for a moment. Okay, wait a moment, I'll go find the boss. The waitress wanted to take Ron and Mona to the rest area next to them to sit down, but Ron waved his hand to refuse her. No, we will go with you. Okay. The expression on the waitress's face changed slightly, but she didn't say much, and immediately turned around and took Ron and Mona upstairs. She was just a salaried person, with only so much money a month. What did the matter between the boss and the FBI have to do with her? Looking at the waitress with appreciation, Ron and Mona followed her upstairs, and then found that there were some lounges on the second floor. The decoration inside was very warm, with sofas, blankets, and curtains. Ron and Mona looked at each other. They had seen that style of sofa in a shopping mall before. If they remembered correctly, they could turn the seat into a bed by lifting it and pulling it outward. Thinking of the men and women downstairs, Mona's eyes flashed with contempt, and Ron's mouth opened. He was now more and more interested in Hux. Soon, the two were taken to the depths of the second floor. The waitress walked to the door of an office and knocked hard. Boss, someone wants to see you. Bang, bang, bang. After knocking several times in a row, there was still no one in the room to answer. The waitress cursed inwardly, turned around to look at Ron and Lassie, and whispered, the boss sometimes brings some female friends he is familiar with to visit. Maybe you go to the back first. Before the waitress finished speaking, Ron pulled her behind Mona, and took out a Glock 18 from his waist. This time, Luo An did not smell blood, but the waitress had just told them that the boss had gone to the office to rest at noon today, and had not come downstairs since then. More than 2 hours had passed. Mona took the waitress back a few steps. Luo An tried to open the office door from the outside, but found that it could not be opened. So without hesitation, he raised his foot and kicked the office door hard. Bang! The office door was kicked open by Luo An in an instant, and Luo An and Mingbei immediately rushed into the office with pistols. The office was very large, with desks and chairs arranged inside, and a small room in the corner. Luo An quickly checked the small room and found no one, so he immediately returned to the office with a desk. At this time, in the center of the office, a fat middle-aged white body was hanging from the ceiling, and there was a collapsed chair under the feet of the body. The expression on the body's face was a little hideous, but Luo An and Mona still recognized each other's identity, and it was the target they were looking for this time, Hux. After taking the screaming waitress away, Mona took out her mobile phone and called the trace examination department, asking them to come to the scene to deal with the body quickly. After finishing the call, Ming looked back and found that Luo An was standing in front of the desk, looking down at something. He walked over and followed Luo An's gaze and found that it was a letter. It is not appropriate to call it a letter. In fact, it is more like a confession. The content in it stated that he was the murderer of Judge Taylor Davis. The reason for the murder was that Taylor Davis had not become a judge and had helped the murderer to perjure himself in a case related to Hex's sister's daughter when he was still working in the prosecution department. Eventually, the murderer escaped, and the sister set fire to herself with her daughter and died in her own house. Most of the houses of ordinary people in Los Angeles are made of wood, and the fire speed is quite fast. When Hex found out, it was too late. After learning that Taylor Davis was not only not punished for this case, but was promoted to a judge, Hex said that he finally couldn't bear it anymore, and decided to kill the other party in his own way. After reading the description on the paper, Mona's face suddenly darkened. Judging from the handwriting alone, the handwriting on this piece of paper is exactly the same as the words Hux had written in the file next to it. Without technical investigation, the naked eye can almost confirm that it was Hux himself who wrote the letter. Moreover, the letters are not sloppy, giving people a sense of confession without regrets. Mona also carefully observed the body next to it for a moment and did not find any signs that Hux was killed first and then hung up. It seems that Hux did climb onto the chair and committed suicide out of fear of crime. Everything is fine. But it's too fake. It's too fake. Mona shook her head repeatedly. Seeing the mobile phone that fell to the ground, she hurriedly put on gloves to pick it up, waved her hand, and prepared to go out. Luo An, I'll check Hux's last call record. Maybe I can find out who forced Hux to commit suicide. No need. Huh. Mona stopped quickly with a puzzled look on her face, turned back and found that Luo An was looking at the scenery outside the window with his back to her in front of the office window. Luo An was silent for a while, then turned around and laughed, saying, the person who forced Hux to commit suicide did not use the phone. He was here at the time. Mona, if you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 392, Voluntary Suicide, Weak Spot. The next morning, in the office area of the Special Investigation Team. So, Lassie sat at her workstation, took a big bite of food, chewed a few times and said vaguely, Roan, what you mean is that the gun club owner Hux didn't really confess and commit suicide, but was forced to commit suicide. And the person who forced him was in the office at the time, right? That's right. Luo An finished the food in his hand and nodded to confirm this. When he entered Hux's office yesterday, he soon found something wrong with the window of the office. There were no signs of opening and closing on the two windows beside, only the middle one. At first, Luo An thought that the window was opened by Hux to add some fresh air to the office. But when Luo An opened the window and looked outside, there were no footprints or other marks on the windowsill, only a thin layer of dust. Hearing this, Lassie was puzzled. Since there are no footprints or other marks, how did you determine that the other party climbed in through the window? Isn't it normal to have dust? Mona next to him also looked at Luo An with a puzzled face, not understanding how he judged. But there is only dust, no fine sand. Roan shook his head, indicating that the window of Hux's office was not far from the road. Over the years, a lot of fine sand had accumulated on the small platforms outside the other two windows. You could feel a lot of it with your fingers. Only outside the middle window, there was very little, only a small part at the edge, and the rest was dust. Then I found a small amount of fine sand on the ground next to the chair behind Hux's desk. Seeing Lassie, Michelle and Mona looking at each other, Roan laughed and explained, Hux himself could not have been outside that window, and the hands of the corpse were also clean, which means that the fine sand was not brought into the office by him. The club attendant also said that Hux's office had not been cleaned up these days. The only explanation is that there was another person in the office at that time. Roan speculated on the scene at that time. Hux flirted with the club members downstairs for a while and went upstairs to return to his office, but as soon as he pushed the door in, he saw someone sitting on his chair. Luo An didn't know whether Hex knew that person, but the other party must have something on Hex. Only for this reason could the murderer easily force Hex to write a confession and then kick over the chair and hang himself in front of the murderer. Judging from the fine sand left next to the chair, the murderer should have stood by and watched when Hex was writing the confession, most likely to prevent Hex from hiding clues related to the murderer in the text. After Hex struggled for a while and lost his breath and finally died, the murderer turned around, opened the window, and easily left along the original route. Son of eating. Damn killer. After listening to Roan's description, Lassie and Mona frowned and cursed in a low voice. At this time, the door of the Special Investigation Team's office was pushed open. Michelle raised the folder in her hand and said, the autopsy results of the victim Hux have come out. The cause of death is indeed mechanical asphyxiation caused by hanging. There was no intervention from other people in the act of hanging, such as someone killing him first and then hanging him up. It can be determined that the victims took the initiative to hang themselves. At the same time, according to the suggestion of team leader Roan, the trace examination department tested the window under the crime scene and indeed found a small amount of substances that did not belong to Hux's office. It can be judged that there was indeed someone other than Hux at the crime scene at that time. Thank you for your hard work. Lassie picked up a bag of breakfast and threw it to Michelle, who caught it easily. Roan took the report issued by the trace examination department. Mona next to him turned on the computer and asked without looking back, "So, what should we do next?" "It's very simple. Investigate the connection between the new victim Hux and the previous victim Taylor Davis. Let's start with the investigation of Taylor Davis's tenure as a judge and the cases he handled when he was in the prosecution department." Roan threw the folder aside and said, "One is a judge who was promoted not long ago from the prosecution department, and the other is a man who went to prison more often than home in the first half of his life, and finally became a club owner in the legitimate industry in the second half of his life. We just found out that they both died one after another. This can't be a coincidence. There must be something in between that we haven't discovered yet." "Okay." Mona nodded and started typing on the keyboard. Roan then turned back to look at Lassie and asked, "How did you investigate the items in Taylor Davis's home?" "Not very good." Lassie pointed to the conference room, which now had 3 large cardboard boxes, all of which were items she had taken back from Taylor Davis' home. "Michelle and I searched through it yesterday. Taylor Davis's personal computer is very simple. It's all cases, almost all of which are related to work. In terms of personal life, Taylor Davis has 2 notebooks, one of which contains the phone numbers of relatives and friends, and the other is a record of his legal knowledge. I found a hidden note in Taylor Davis's phone, which contained the contact information of Samia and several other women who were in the same industry as Samia." "Wow." Roan thought for a moment and said, "Leave the investigation of Taylor Davis' personal belongings to me. Lassie, Michelle, you two investigate Hux's situation. Maybe you can find familiar items related to Taylor Davis here." "No problem. Leave it to us." Lassie and Michelle nodded, immediately got up, and left the special investigation team, and went to Hux's home to check the situation. Roan pushed the door, and walked into the conference room. Looking at the personal belongings related to Taylor Davis in front of him, he felt a little headache. He took a sip of the teacup, and took a folder, to start looking through it. Time passed by minute. 2 hours later, when Luo An was checking Taylor Davis's own work log, his cell phone rang suddenly. He pressed the answer button and Lassie on the other end of the phone said, "Luo An, I found a safe under a tile on the kitchen floor of Hux's house. In addition to some US dollars, a pistol and a passport, there is also an overseas bank account in the safe." Michelle checked the situation of the bank account. The records show that Hux deposits a sum of money into it every month, and then the money is withdrawn by someone in a European country. Luo An frowned slightly. "Can you find out who that person is?" "The other party's identity cannot be found. The other party is very cautious. Every time he withdraws money, he hides his face firmly in front of the surveillance camera." The voice on the other end of the phone changed to Michelle, who answered, "However, bank records show that their system has sold maternity products and maternal and child products to the other party. It feels like the other party should be a woman. Then the other party should be Hux's weak spot." Luo An sneered. "Using the weak spot to force others is always the most convenient and effective way." At this moment, Mona's voice came from outside the meeting room. "Luo An, come here. I found something here." Chapter 393 Big Fish. Luo An with black eyes. Hearing Mona's voice, Luo An immediately walked out of the conference room with his mobile phone and asked as he walked, "What's going on? I have been wondering before, where did Hux, a guy who has been in and out of prison many times and has less than $500 in his bank account at the age of 35, get the money to open such a gun club?" Mona stepped back to make room, showed the information in the computer to Luo An, and explained, "Opening a gun club is not a trivial matter. It requires a large amount of startup capital. So I checked Hux's financial situation and found that the first large sum of money he obtained came from a one-man business group." Luo An bent down and looked at the computer. The screen showed the information of the one-man business group. The information showed that this group had more than 50 limited companies, all of which were established overseas. Cayman Islands, Belize, Isle of Man. Luo An looked at the addresses of these companies and raised his eyebrows slightly. It seems that these companies are used to transfer funds and launder money. They can wash large amounts of money without leaving any traces. There must be a big fish behind this. But I can't find out the true situation of those companies. Mona behind Luo An scratched her head. There were too many cross-holdings and diversified investments between these companies, and many places were not displayed to the public. She couldn't find out who the boss behind these companies was by herself. Teach you a method. Luo An thought for a while, turned to Mona and smiled. Cross-compare the accounts of these companies with the physical storefronts they own, and see which region has the most storefronts, and who is the owner of those storefronts. After hearing Luo An's words, Mona's eyes lit up, patted Luo An's arm hard, and immediately started typing on the keyboard. Okay, I'll start now. Complex pages began to flash on Mona's computer. Luo An, who was standing behind her, pondered for a while, suddenly thought of something, turned around and quickly walked into the conference room, and then returned to his team leader's office. After a long time, Mona suddenly smiled, raised her hand and said loudly, Luo An. Bang. Just as she started to speak, there was a knock on the table in the team leader's office. Mona was startled and stopped talking and looked back. Then she found Luo An holding a folder and walked out of the team leader's office with an expressionless face. Luo An asked before Mona could. Mona, what did you find out? I found out that among the 50 or so companies, one of them has a trust fund. That trust fund has bought more than a dozen buildings in a city in California. The chairman of this trust fund is named Ronnie K. Sheffield. And Ronnie K. Sheffield's husband is named Trevine Sheffield. Mona checked the couple's personal information and left more area on the screen to her husband. The FBI internal database shows that Trevine Sheffield has been prosecuted for many crimes such as selling flour and murder, but he has not been found guilty. In addition, the FBI internal database speculates that several bank robberies, drug gangs, and hired murders in California are related to him, but there is no evidence. He is an out-and-out gangster. Luo An nodded and explained, before, we had been focusing on the cases that Taylor Davis handled during his lifetime, so we didn't find any clues. I just checked the work log of Taylor Davis, which shows that he will handle a big case with the Federal Department of Justice next month. The specific content of the big case is not written in the log. I just called the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice sent me the case report of that case, which shows that the case is related to Trevine Sheffield. The reason why Luo An knocked on the table just now was not because he just thought of this, but because the document sent by the Department of Justice was all black at a glance. In the whole document, Luo An only saw the name of Trevine Sheffield and the names of the victims Taylor Davis and Hux. He could not see anything else. More than a dozen pages of text were all black, and the black blocks accounted for as high as 98%. Luo An, who was black-eyed, was speechless. However, considering that a certain federal president was prosecuted in the future, the FBI faced media inquiries and produced a positive document full of black blocks, which shocked the media and the public. Luo An could only sigh that these federal law enforcement departments are really passed down from generation to generation, and they don't care about any influence and opinions at all, as long as they work. So, what you mean is? Mona pondered for a few seconds, looked up at Roan, and said, the Ministry of Justice secretly prepared a court to send Trevine Sheffield to prison. Taylor Davis is one of the prosecutors, and Hux is a juror or witness. As a result, Trevine Sheffield got the news from somewhere, and then asked someone to kill Taylor Davis and Hux. From the information given to me by the Ministry of Justice, it tells me that the court will be postponed this time, which is basically certain. Roan folded his hands and nodded in agreement with Mona's statement, and then said, I have asked the Ministry of Justice for the full list of participants in the court they prepared, including the judge, jury, and witnesses, and they will send the information to me later. We need to find out who leaked this news. Trevine Sheffield must have many enemies over the years. Once he is convicted of a crime, Trevine Sheffield will never leave prison for the rest of his life. In order not to go to prison, Trevine Sheffield may take action again, and there may be jurors or witnesses who will die later. The jury system is a feature of federal law. In addition to the judge, there are about 12 jurors sitting next to the court to listen to evidence, witnesses, defense and prosecutors, and finally make a legal judgment on the defendant. These 12 jurors are generally randomly selected. When encountering criminal cases, their personal identity information will be kept confidential to prevent the defendant or plaintiff from contacting them before or after. Many people praise the jury system, saying that it guarantees the fairness and democracy of judicial decisions, and at the same time, can enhance the sense of identity and participation of federal citizens in the judicial system. But also because of the existence of the jury system, a large number of eloquent defense lawyers have emerged in the federal government. They not only read the law and know how to apply the law, but also can always persuade the jury with emotion and reason to help criminals get rid of or reduce their crimes. After all, the jury is made up of people, and people will be influenced by personal prejudices and social values. This is shown in a certain movie. A lawyer won the defense victory by saying to the jury that this is not freedom as a politically correct value. Rohn did not comment on the pros and cons of the jury system. At 1 p.m., he posted the photos of the 12 jurors and 6 witnesses given to him by the Ministry of Justice on the wall of the conference room. After a quick glance, Rohn turned back to Mona, Lassie and Michelle and asked, "So among these 18 survivors, are there any who have any connection with Trevian Sheffield or the organization around him? Has anyone received an unusually large amount of funds, or has their recent consumption suddenly increased abnormally?" Lassie and Mona shook their heads. Michelle raised her hand, picked up a person's personal information, and said, "I found one. She should be the informant in the jury." Chapter 394 Sonic. 1 good news, 2 bad news. Special investigation team, conference room. As Michelle raised her hand, Rohn, Mona, and Lassie all turned their eyes to her. Michelle distributed the papers in her hand to the 3 people and introduced them. This lady's name is Annette, and she works in the Federal Postal Department. Wow, it's not easy to work in the Postal Department for 20 years. Rohn looked at Annette's photo and information, and raised his eyebrows slightly, and asked, "What's wrong with her?" As expected, money. Michelle called up a record of the funds turnover in Annette's bank account and said, "Federal law stipulates that in criminal cases, if a federal citizen suddenly receives more than $10,000 in a short period of time, after being selected as a juror, the juror and the funds he received will be investigated." Last Wednesday and last Saturday, Ms. Annette deposited $3,000 and $6,000 in cash into the bank respectively, a total of $9,000, just below the $10,000 limit. Lassie next to him laughed when he heard this, and Rohn nodded, then asked, "Then is there any connection between her and Trevian Sheffield?" "I found a little connection." Michelle didn't say anything. Mona, who had been typing on the keyboard next to her, suddenly spoke up. Rohn and Lassie came over to her and Mona explained, "Ms. Annette works in the postal department. Her husband is a doctor and works in a hospital. Trevian Sheffield has never been to that hospital, but his wife, Lanique Sheffield, went to that hospital for laser hair removal some time ago." X3. Hearing the name of the operation, the 3 people, except Mona, were silent for a few seconds. Rohn was the first to break the silence and said, "Mona, Michelle, the 2 of you stay in the special investigation team and carefully investigate the situation of Trevian Sheffield and his wife Lanique Sheffield, as well as their subordinates, employees, relatives, etc. Lassie, come with me. We will talk to Ms. Annette about the salary and benefits of the Federal Postal Department." "Okay, no problem." On the road, Rohn drove the SUV forward quickly, and Lassie sat in the passenger seat and carefully checked the information records of Annette's family. The records show that Annette and her husband have not paid off their car loans, mortgages, and college loans, and they have little left from their monthly salary. They have a daughter who was diagnosed with a chronic heart disease some time ago. I think this may be the reason why Annette did this. The probability is very high. Luo An nodded. In the country of the Federation, there are too many people who are forced to commit crimes for their families and money. As an ordinary person living in the Federation, from birth to death, you are basically inseparable from loans. If you encounter any risks, you may fall into the abyss. Arriving at the target location, Luo An parked the SUV on the side of the road and walked to Ms. Annette's home with Lassie. When they arrived at the door of the small apartment, Lassie was about to knock on the door, but Luo An's expression changed, and he grabbed Lassie and took out a pistol from his waist. He had a more sensitive sense of smell and smelled the smell of blood. Seeing this, Lassie's expression changed, and she also quickly took out a pistol from behind. The two leaned against the door of the apartment on the left and right, counting down to 3, and Luo An raised his foot and kicked the door of the apartment hard. Bang! The two of them quickly checked every room in the apartment with their pistols, making sure there were no enemies. They shouted to each other, "The second floor is safe. The basement is safe." The two put away their pistols and returned to the living room on the first floor. At this time, there were several plush toys sitting on the living room. In the middle of the living room with a very warm atmosphere, a man was lying on the ground. It was Annette's husband. On the long sofa in the living room, sat a woman holding a child in her arms. They were Annette and her daughter. Annette's hands and feet were tied to the sofa with ropes. There were many bruises and scars on her face and body. It was obvious that she had been tortured before her death. There was a bullet hole behind Annette's husband, in the center of Annette's eyebrows, and on the back of Annette's daughter's head. The blood that flowed out dyed several crooked plush toys red. The scene was very simple. The experienced Lassie and Roan quickly guessed the scene of the crime. Annette's husband opened the door for the murderer and led him into the living room with his back to the murderer. At that time, Annette was sitting on the sofa with her daughter in her arms. When the murderer saw the target of this trip, he shot and killed Annette's husband without saying a word. Then the murderer controlled Annette and her daughter and tortured Annette. After getting the clues or answers he wanted, he shot Annette and her daughter to death and left. As for what clues or answers he wanted, it was not difficult to guess whether Annette had told others about her snitching for Trevi in Sheffield. Damn murderer. Son of a bitch. Looking at the little girl in Annette's arms, Lassie's face was very ugly. After cursing a few words, she took out her mobile phone and called the trace examination department. They were needed to deal with the scene. At the same time, Luo An, who was next to him, folded his arms and carefully examined the scene, then suddenly walked to the TV in the living room and squatted down to check. After Lassie hung up the phone, she saw Roan's actions and hurried over to him and asked, "What did you find?" "A new toy." Following Roan's guidance, Lassie found a furry two-headed toy sitting next to the TV. She asked hesitantly, "Is this Sonic?" "No, it's a camera." Roan picked up the blue plush toy and pinched its left eye. Only then did Lassie realize that the eye was actually a camera. This should be Annette's backup plan for herself. Luo An thought for a moment, stood up and looked at the body of the girl on the sofa, and said in a deep voice, "Annette couldn't have been unaware of the dangers of cooperating with someone like Trevi Sheffield, so she planned to use surveillance videos or other items to threaten the other party and protect her own safety. But as an ordinary person, she obviously underestimated a desperate man like Trevi Sheffield, and the killer sent by the other party didn't bargain with her at all." Lassie nodded with an ugly expression, and then added, "After seeing the killer kill her husband, Annette knew that she and her daughter would definitely not survive today, so she didn't tell anyone about the camera until she died. Maybe it was to atone for her sins, or maybe she wanted us to help her family get revenge." Luo An patted Lassie's arm and took her to the second floor of the apartment. Maybe they could find something hidden by Annette. But there were signs that the second floor had been searched, and Luo An and Lassie didn't find any clues. Items such as laptops and diaries disappeared, and it was likely that they were taken away by the murderer. Soon, the trace inspection department arrived. Roan and Lassie handed the scene over to them and asked them to find out the 3 bullets that killed Annette's family. After handing them the ballistic inspection report, they started the SUV and returned to the special investigation team. After getting the Sonic brought back by Roan, Mona fiddled with it for a while, picked up a data cable, and connected the camera to the computer. Mona tapped the keyboard a few times, then looked up and asked, "Everyone, there is a good news and 2 bad news. Which one do you want to hear first?" Chapter 395, The Introverted and Gentle Murderer, Arrest Operation. In the office of the Special Investigation Team, Luo An and Lassie did not answer Mona's words, but just looked at her quietly with their arms folded. Michelle, who wanted to answer Mona's question, swallowed her words and sat back in her seat. Really boring. Seeing Ron and Lassie's actions, Mona muttered in a low voice, tapped the keyboard a few times, and began to play the video recorded in the surveillance camera. She also said, "There is a problem with the placement of the sonic. The surveillance camera only recorded the scene of Annette's husband bringing the murderer into the room. There is no record of the other parties' killing and torture. In addition, Annette should have been deceived by the seller. The camera itself has problems. It is a defective product. It only records the picture, not any sound." X3 Ron and Michelle's mouth twitched when they heard it. Lassie swallowed the words of complaint in her mouth and asked, "So, this sonic is useless?" "No, its toy function is still there, just ignore its lost right eye." Mona shook her head and continued to tap the computer keyboard to convert the surveillance picture into the FBI internal database. While operating, she said, "No kidding. As I said just now, this camera only recorded the scene of Annette's husband bringing the murderer into the room. The murderer's face is still very clear in the picture. The FBI internal database has found the identity of the other party, Samson Brook. Well done. I will reward you with a piece of secret steak for dinner, provided that you don't work overtime tonight." Luo An patted Mona on the shoulder, looked down at the computer, and asked, "What is the specific situation of this Samson?" Mona rolled her eyes speechlessly, but still transferred Samson's information to the computer screen. "A former criminal, 40 years old, who has just been released from prison for armed assault for 4 months, and is currently living in a halfway house. According to the FBI internal database, several murders are related to him, but there is a lack of key evidence, so he has been at large for so long." Halfway House. It sounds like a very commercial name, but in fact its English name is Halfway House, which can be called Re-Entry Training Center or Community Correction Center. It is a transitional residential community correction institution that improves environmental adaptability. The operating costs of federal prisons for guarding prisoners are too high, and this is all taxpayers' money, so some prisoners with good performance will be recognized by the judge and allowed to be paroled. After being released on parole, prisoners may find it difficult to integrate into society or have nowhere to go or no house to live in, so transitional specialized institutions and government public housing are needed to accommodate them for social adaptation training. Halfway houses provide necessary food and accommodation conditions for such specific groups, protect their necessary privacy, help them develop plans for re-entry into society, and provide staff to assist in solving the above problems. "Let's go, Lassie, let's go out again." After noting the location of Samson's halfway house, Ron glanced at the time displayed on the computer and Samson, a middle-aged white man with a crew cut. He patted Lassie's arm and walked towards the equipment room. "If we move faster, maybe we don't have to work overtime tonight." "Okay." Lassie followed Ron closely and asked as she walked, "By the way, if we don't work overtime tonight, can you give me a portion of the secret steak you mentioned?" A halfway house in the northern part of Los Angeles. A SWAT transport vehicle slowly pulled up to the roadside. Ron and Lassie got out of the sub of the special investigation team. After the SWAT team blocked the back door, the two walked in through the main door of the halfway house. "Hello, FBI." The person in charge of the halfway house was a chubby elderly white woman named Adele. Ron showed her the golden badge and asked, "Excuse me, which room is Samson Brook in? We have something to talk to him about." "Samson?" Adele was slightly stunned, got up and left the office to lead Ron and Lassie up the stairs. As she walked, she asked, "What do you want to do with Samson? He is a very introverted child. He behaves well on weekdays and treats people very gently." Hearing the other party call the 40-year-old Samson a child, the 25-year-old Ron's mouth twitched. But thinking of a witch in the future who called the 80-year-old federal president a child, Luo An suppressed his complaints and replied with a smile, "We came to find Samson this time because he is too introverted and too gentle in dealing with people." Adele. Samson's room was on the second floor. Luo An and Lassie leaned on the door on both sides. Adele followed Lassie's instructions and knocked on the door from the side, saying, "Samson, there is a package for you downstairs." "Okay, thank you, I'll be down right away." As soon as Adele finished speaking, a male voice suddenly rang in the room. Lassie pulled Adele behind her. After a few seconds, the door was slowly opened from the inside as expected. Looking at the door that was gradually getting bigger, Lassie's mouth corners slightly raised. The next second, the open door suddenly paused, and the people in the room slammed the door shut. Luo An saw this and kicked it up without hesitation. FBI. Open the door. Bang, bang, bang. The moment Roan rushed into the room, Samson inside immediately fired 3 shots at the door. Roan, who reacted quickly, rolled over and successfully dodged, but Samson also took the opportunity to hide in the depths of the room. Fouquet. Shooting as soon as you meet. What an introverted guy. Roan hurriedly caught up with his weapon. Lassie asked Adele to leave quickly and followed closely with a pistol. Deep in the room was a kitchen with a bathroom. Roan did not comment on the designer's head because the kitchen window had been removed and Samson had already flipped out of the 2nd floor through this window. SWAT team. The suspect is running to the east. After taking a look at the street outside, Roan immediately pressed the communicator to notify the SWAT team to move to the east to block Samson, then grabbed the iron edge of the window and flipped out and began to chase Samson to the east. *%. Lassie looked at the window in front of her and her eyelids twitched. She cursed a few words in a low voice and quickly flipped out. Samson ran away very quickly and he chose to run on crowded roads. He was not very clean when he ran away. He not only pulled down the trash can on the roadside, but also pushed down passers-by to create obstacles for Roan, who was chasing him. There were too many pedestrians on the road, and Roan was afraid of accidental injuries and did not dare to shoot casually. However, the obstacles created by Samson were nothing to him, who was quick-witted. Roan dodged left and right and quickly closed the distance between the two of them in Samson's astonished eyes. On the other side, the SWAT team was also fast. They soon drove to the road where Samson was going. Samson frowned when he saw this and took advantage of the SWAT team's failure to react and immediately turned left into the alley next to him. Roan, behind Samson, saw the other party entering the alley, touched the stun grenade on his back, grinned, and quickly followed. At the same time, Lassie was also running forward quickly on another street at the end of the alley. Hearing Roan's mention of Samson's route in the communicator, she also took out her pistol and turned into the alley. Chapter 396. Fighting in the alley. Mona doesn't like working overtime. In an alley on the east side of a halfway house in northern Los Angeles, next to 2 trash cans in the middle of the alley, a middle-aged white man and woman in simple clothes were working. The man had a ferocious look on his face and moved quickly, while the woman had her back to him and was expressionless, counting the dollars in her hand with her saliva. At this moment, an uninvited guest suddenly ran into the alley from outside, scaring the man so much that he paused, and the woman quickly put the US dollars in her arms. The visitor was Samson, who had planned to quickly cross the alley and get rid of Roan and others from the other road at the end of the alley. But what Samson didn't expect was that the end of the alley was blocked by a woman holding a pistol. The woman at the end of the alley was Lassie. Following Roan's instructions, she entered the alley and saw Samson holding a gun. She immediately hid at the side of the alley and shouted, "Stop! Drop your gun! Put your hands up! Damn cousin!" Samson cursed and immediately turned around to return the way he came and escape from another alley, but found that Roan was very fast and had blocked the position where he had just entered the alley. Roan showed Samson a kind smile, shook the pistol in his hand, and said in a very kind tone, "Put down your weapon and put your hands up, otherwise I will shoot." *%. Samson looked ugly and said a lot of greetings to Roan, Lassie and the FBI. Seeing the middle-aged woman and the middle-aged man squatting silently behind the trash can because of fear and not wanting to cause trouble, Samson pulled the middle-aged woman up from the ground and put her in front of him without saying a word, pointed the gun at the middle-aged woman's temple, and shouted, "Let me go. Otherwise I will shoot." The disheveled middle-aged woman's face was full of panic, but she suppressed the fear in her heart and clenched her teeth without screaming, just looking at Luo An with a pleading face. Next to the trash can on the ground, the middle-aged man, who was also disheveled, had no intention of helping the middle-aged woman. He just quietly tidied his clothes, lowered his head, and began to try to reduce his presence. "Samson, this is meaningless." Seeing the woman being held hostage by the other party, Luo An's expression did not change. He slowly approached Samson with a gun in his hand and said in a calm voice, "Let go of the hostage, and I may be able to help you say something in front of the judge later. Whether it is good or bad depends on the other party's performance. I say it again. Put down the gun. Let me go." Samson looked more and more ugly as he looked at Lassie, who was blocking the end of the alley behind him, and then looked at Roan, who was gradually approaching him. Suddenly, Samson abruptly removed the pistol from the temple of the middle-aged woman in his arms, pointed the muzzle at the middle-aged man, who was trying to reduce his presence next to the trash can, and shouted, "Don't think I dare not shoot. He is dead. Just because you won't let me leave." Bang, bang, bang. The next second, 3 gunshots rang out at the end of the alley. Samson fell to the ground with disbelief and shock on his face. When he shouted loudly and prepared to shoot, Roan shot faster than him and pulled the trigger directly, firing 2 bullets in succession. One bullet hit Samson's right hand holding the gun, knocking the pistol Samson was holding away, and the other bullet hit Samson's exposed left leg, making him unable to continue to run away and fall to the ground. At the same time, Lassie, who had been waiting and aiming for a long time at the end of the alley, heard the gunshot and fired a shot, and the bullet perfectly hit Samson's other leg. The man sitting next to the trash can was sitting there like a wooden man. When he saw Samson pointing the gun at him, he was so scared that he didn't know what to do. The middle-aged woman held hostage by Samson collapsed to the ground with her legs limp. After taking a few deep breaths, her face suddenly became ferocious. She turned around and kicked Samson on the ground while cursing. "Stop." Roan called SWAT to come here to deal with Samson and quickly stepped forward to stop the middle-aged woman's action. At the same time, Lassie also came here, first collected the gun that Samson dropped on the ground, and then took out handcuffs to control Samson. Okay, no problem." Seeing Luo An stop her, the middle-aged woman immediately stopped her action, and the ferocious look on her face disappeared instantly and was replaced by a full smile. "Thank you, Mr. Agent. Thank you very much. If it weren't for you, I might be." A lot of compliments came out of the middle-aged woman's mouth, as if they were thrown at Luo An for free. As she spoke, the middle-aged woman kicked the middle-aged man next to the trash can a few times, and finally looked at Luo An with a smile and said, "Since the person has been caught, I will leave first. Thank you again." The middle-aged white man who was kicked twice next to the trash can finally reacted, glared at the middle-aged woman, and quickly stood up to express his gratitude to Luo An and Lassie, and then fled with the middle-aged woman, and quickly left the alley. Seeing the genetic material at the cuff of the middle-aged white man's pants, Lassie showed a hint of disgust in her eyes and asked, "Luo An, these 2 people?" Lassie saw clearly what the identity of this middle-aged man and woman was. The 2 had violated federal laws, and the FBI had the power to arrest them. "Don't worry about it. The LAPD outside will deal with them." Glancing at the middle-aged man and woman's backs as they quickly left, Roan was in no mood to deal with the street girl and the ticket customer, nor did he want to steal the LAPD's job. For now, it was most important to deal with Samson and the sniper case. Soon, SWAT arrived at the alley. Lassie and several SWAT members took Samson to the hospital for treatment. After treating his wounds, they took him back for interrogation. Roan walked back to the door of the halfway house and prepared to drive the sub back to the special investigation team. At the same time, across the street in the alley, 2 patrolmen were stuffing the middle-aged man and woman who were cursing at the LAPD into the car. Special investigation team, office area, 8:30 p.m. Taking a bite of the secret steak Roan brought back, Mona muttered as she ate, "I hate working overtime." Michelle, who was also eating the secret steak next to Mona, didn't say anything, but just swallowed the food in her mouth and silently poured Mona a cup of coffee. Across from the 2, Lassie was eating the free food without saying a word. She had been busy saving money recently and often ate for free. Roan, Mona and Michelle didn't care about the snacks. Those women outside didn't know how they were persuaded. Anyway, Lassie's spending was surprisingly low during this period. Roan, who finished eating faster than the 3 women and ate 3 steaks by himself, drank a cup of tea, breathed a long sigh of relief, and said with a smile, "I don't like working overtime either, so after this case is handled, the special investigation team will have 2 days off to rest." Great. Lassie was the first to raise her fork and cheer loudly. Mona smiled, and Michelle's faint smile remained unchanged, but she just silently poured Roan a cup of tea. Roan picked up the teacup and took a sip. It happened that the team leader Potent Burn told him this afternoon that the procedures for Chenier and Winslow to transfer to the department had been almost completed. Although not all of them were completed, they could come to the special investigation team to participate in the work. After Mona, Lassie and Michelle had eaten and rested for a while, Luo An drank the tea in the cup in one gulp, stood up and walked towards the interrogation room, raised the folder in his hand, and asked, "Let's go. Who will go with me to the interrogation room to bring Samson a midnight snack?" Chapter 397 Interrogation. Making cakes. How to make cakes. Special investigation team. Interrogation room. Mona still had work to do, and Lassie was a little full and couldn't move for the time being, so Michelle went into the interrogation room with Roan. In the interrogation room, Samson, who was shot in both legs, sat in a wheelchair. His hands were handcuffed to the interrogation table, and his bandaged feet were also handcuffed together. He lowered his head and didn't say a word. I don't know what he was thinking. "Good evening, introverted Mr. Sampson." Roan sat down opposite Sampson, opened the folder in his hand, and looked at it, and said, "Due to your negligence in the operation in the hospital, we found a cello case in your room at the halfway house, and found a sniper rifle and 2 pistols in it. After the trace examination department tested it, it can be determined that the sniper rifle was the murder weapon of Judge Taylor Davis. Sampson, do you have anything to explain? For example, the sniper rifle was actually picked up by you." Sampson raised his head, looked at Roan coldly, and said nothing. "Okay." Luo An didn't care. He then turned to the second page of the folder and took out a photo of a 4 or 5-year-old girl with light blue eyes. He said, "We checked your bank account. What surprised me was that you actually have a wife and a daughter. This girl's eyes are exactly the same as yours. You can tell that she is definitely your daughter without a DNA test. Life is a miracle, right?" Looking at the photo of his daughter that Luo An placed in front of him on the interrogation table, Sampson's eyes moved subconsciously. Luo An smiled slightly and pushed the photo slightly in front of Samson and said, "Samson, you are standing at a fork in the road now, but you are not the only one standing here, but also your daughter. Assassinating a judge, a key witness who will testify in court. The best result you can encounter later is to enter the highest level federal prison, which is the kind of prison where you have to squat in a small dark box for 23.5 hours a day. You will live this kind of life until you die, for decades, and you will not be able to receive visits and see your wife and daughter. Your daughter isn't in school yet, and you must be aware of the atmosphere in federal schools." Hearing Roan's words, Sampson's face became increasingly ugly, and his breathing became increasingly rapid, and he suddenly shouted from behind, "Enough." Bang, not enough. Sampson suddenly shouted, and Roan slammed the table and stood up, shouting even louder than Sampson, "You're just a small shrimp, you know? Our target is the big fish. Do you really want to live in that dark box? Never see your daughter again in your life? Don't forget the federal saying, blood ties trump everything. Don't ruin her." Sampson's eyes were red, his chest heaving, and he was breathing heavily, staring at Roan. Roan was not to be outdone and stared at the other party. Time passed by minute, and finally Sampson's breathing rhythm slowly stabilized. He asked in a hoarse voice, "How can I be sure that you can bring him down? He has too many means, and he knows too many people. This is the Federation. He has money. He has plenty of ways to know who the people on the jury and those witnesses are, and then get rid of them." Sampson didn't say who he was, but Roan and Michelle knew that the other party was talking about the mastermind behind the scenes, Trevin Sheffield. Looking at Sampson, whose face was red and full of disbelief, Roan didn't get angry, but grinned. Roan was not afraid of questioning or negotiating conditions, because it meant that the other party's position had begun to loosen, and the next step was nothing more than the conditions and the amount of benefits. "Don't worry, I certainly have a way to bring him down 100%, otherwise I wouldn't discuss this with you. I won't waste time." Roan patted Samson on the shoulder, then extended his hand to Samson and said with a smile, "So, you will be our witness, right? Blood ties are more important than anything else." Samson was silent for a long time and finally gritted his teeth, extended his hand and shook hands with Roan. Seeing this, Roan nodded with satisfaction and smiled. "Very good, you made the right decision." Letting go of Samson's hand, Roan turned back to signal Michelle that the interrogation was over and the two left the interrogation room together. As soon as he walked out of the interrogation room, Roan called the head of the Ministry of Justice who was in charge of the Luo An Sheffield case. After the other party promised to come to the Special Investigation Team office area immediately, Roan fiddled with his mobile phone, found a familiar phone number, and dialed it. "Captain Elmer? Yes, it's me, Roan." After receiving the other party's response that he would bring people to the Special Investigation Team immediately, Roan smiled and hung up the phone. Roan likes to eat a piece of cake by himself, but when the cake is too small and it is a bit difficult for him to eat it by himself, he prefers to make the cake bigger. When everyone eats the cake together, Roan gets more than before. He also has a good relationship with those people. In the future, when he encounters other things, there will be people who can help him. It is a win-win situation. The next day, at 8 o'clock in the morning, the meeting room of the Special Investigation Team. As soon as Roan sat down in the main seat of the meeting room, a familiar laugh rang out outside. It is worthy of Roan Greenwood's Special Investigation Team. The agents under him are all talented. Michelle brought the visitor and his agents into the meeting room. Roan stood up to greet him. The other party was the Senior Investigation Team Leader of ICI, Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, Elmer. Elmer and Roan are old acquaintances. From the beginning when the two were introduced to each other by Augustus and the 5th Investigation Team, to the cooperation of the two in several cases, and the two joking and chatting at the FBI Washington headquarters, it can be said that Roan is definitely Elmer's favorite young man for so many years. Not only because Roan was promoted to the head of the Special Investigation Team at a young age and had a bright future, but also because Roan always gave Elmer a big gift every time he came to see him. For ICI, Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, the latter is the most important. The IS also has internal assessment standards, and the competent are promoted, and the mediocre are demoted. Elmer has eaten a lot of cakes with Roan's help twice, which has aroused the jealousy of many colleagues. Elmer secretly decided that, even if he did not gain anything from this trip to Los Angeles, or even lost money, he would spare no effort to help Roan, and never let Roan contact other team leaders in the eyes. So Elmer also brought Roan a gift this time, a large box of Yingling black tea. After knowing that Roan likes to drink tea, Elmer got some Yingling black tea. This is the favorite tea of the Queen of the United Kingdom. Elmer does not know much about tea, but he feels that, if the Queen likes it, the quality must not be bad. "Thank you, Captain Elmer. It's very valuable." Roan took the tea and smiled. The two of them sat on the chair and chatted happily. The agents under Elmer were amazed. They rarely saw their boss being so amiable. Not long after, Cecilia, the captain of the Ministry of Justice who was in charge of the Luo An Sheffield case, also arrived at the Special Investigation Team with several agents. The three parties arrived and briefly introduced each other. Roan coughed. After everyone quieted down, he pulled over a whiteboard with a bunch of photos and began to formally draw pictures. Formally start the meeting. Chapter 398 Discussion in the conference room. Arrest plan. Special Investigations Team, conference room. In the center of the whiteboard, there is a photo of a middle-aged white man wearing a black suit and a Federal Standard fake smile showing 8 teeth. "This is the guy we are going to send to jail for this case." Roan pointed at the guy in the photo and introduced him to the agents in the conference room. Luo An Sheffield is 39 years old this year. He has a wife, Luo Sheffield, and a son who is studying in another country outside the Federation. The FBI internal database shows that Luo An Sheffield is a standard template for a gangster. He first led a few people to rob several banks and saved up the first pot of gold. Later, he started drug trafficking and smuggling. He did not seize territory like ordinary gangsters, but continued to expand his legitimate industry. He used the money he got to open a shell company to help himself launder money and make money. Roan finished his brief introduction and turned his eyes to Cecilia, the team leader of the Ministry of Justice. Seeing this, the other party was not polite. She stood up and walked to the whiteboard, took the pen Roan handed to her, and continued to introduce. Trevian Sheffield is a guy who likes to make quick money. When facing industry competition between companies, he often hires killers or lets his men directly get rid of the boss of the other company. At the beginning, when Trevian Sheffield's company was short of funds for expansion, this guy directly used kidnapping, extortion and bank robbery to get money, and then injected the money into the company in batches after laundering it. We noticed Trevian Sheffield a long time ago and sent undercover agents to him, but he was very cautious, and we never got a clear handle on him. Cecilia, the head of the Department of Justice, talked about the documents in her hand. After listening for a while, Roan finally understood why they hadn't brought him down for so long. Not only did he rigidly enforce federal laws, firmly believe in procedural justice and fail to find key evidence, but he was also selfish and had no spirit of cooperation. He always wanted to handle the Trevian Sheffield case himself and have his cake and eat it too. If Roan hadn't led the special investigation team to catch Sampson, the killer who killed Judge Taylor Davis, witness club owner Hux, and juror Renette, Cecilia, the head of the Department of Justice, would never have participated in this meeting. Even if she participated, Cecilia would not say so much. She might even hand the document with 98% of the content blacked out to Roan and Elmer. Thinking of this, Roan looked at Cecilia, who had prominent cheekbones, with a hint of disdain in his eyes, and then looked at Elmer, who was sitting opposite him. When he heard Cecilia say that the amount of money laundered by Trevian Sheffield over the years might exceed $100 million, Elmer's breathing became slightly rapid. There is less than a month left before the federal Christmas every year. Every Christmas, the eyes will compare the work content of various aspects, and the capable ones will be promoted, and the mediocre ones will be demoted. After this case is solved, Elmer feels that he may have a chance to move up one step. Elmer subconsciously turned his head and looked at Roan with joy, but found that Roan first looked at Cecilia, who was talking in front of him, and then gave him a look. Elmer was slightly stunned, and then handed it back to Roan, and gave him a look. The next second, the two foxes, one old and one young, raised their lips slightly. They both understood what the other meant. This case is a big deal, and the leading power cannot be handed over to Cecilia, the team leader of the Ministry of Justice. They should first cooperate to squeeze her out, and then discuss who will take the lead between the two of them. So when Cecilia, standing in front of the whiteboard, said that they had been investigating Trevian Sheffield for a long time, and that her investigation team would be responsible for the follow-up work, Elmer immediately stood up with a smile. Captain Cecilia, how about I tell you about my plan on how to solve the Trevian Sheffield case? Okay. Cecilia had no reason to refuse, so she nodded and walked back to her seat in front of the whiteboard. Elmer coughed twice and said, we can do this next. First, we ICI, Internal Revenue Service criminal investigation, can bring Trevian Sheffield to us. Elmer's plan was very simple. Just like when they solved the mafia boss Al Capone, they would directly bring Trevian Sheffield to the eyes for a period of time and constantly torment him on tax issues so that he would have no energy to deal with other things, so as to cut off his contact with the outside world. Anyway, the royal power has granted. Federal law stipulates that ICI has the power to arrest people first and then provide evidence. During this period, other law enforcement agencies took advantage of the panic of Trevian Sheffield's men and quickly found evidence plus arrested plus interrogated them and finally put Trevian Sheffield in jail. The plan was a bit old, but Elmer didn't care. The routine was not new, but it worked. As long as it could succeed, it would be fine. After listening to Elmer's description, team leader Cecilia, who had always wanted to take the lead, immediately shook her head and stood up, saying, no, do this. As expected of team leader Elmer, you can think of a way to solve this case so quickly. Before team leader Cecilia finished speaking, Roan stood up and applauded with a smile to interrupt her. Elmer smiled slightly and then sang in unison with Roan to quickly formulate a specific action plan without giving team leader Cecilia a chance to interrupt. *%. Team leader Cecilia, who has worked in the Ministry of Justice for so many years, is not a fool. She quickly realized that Roan and Elmer had already discussed the matter of the case's lead in private. After working out the plan with Elmer, Roan smiled slightly, turned to look at team leader Cecilia, and asked with a smile, "I wonder if team leader Cecilia has any suggestions for this action plan?" Considering that the plan Roan and Elmer worked out together had a much higher success rate and faster efficiency than the plan she had previously drawn up, team leader Cecilia glanced at the other agents in the conference room, took a deep breath to suppress the anger in her heart, chose to swallow this loss, and replied, "No. The plan Roan and Elmer worked out seemed fair." The eyes detained Trewayne Sheffield, cut off his contact with the outside world for a short period of time, and investigated Trewayne Sheffield's tax issues. The special investigation team blocked Trewayne Sheffield's companies and industries, arrested his men, and prevented anyone from leaving the Federation or transferring funds. Cecilia's investigation team in the Department of Justice held a pile of evidence and was responsible for interrogating Trewayne Sheffield's men. The special investigation team assisted on the side and quickly found the key evidence that could send Trewayne Sheffield to prison. Of course, as mentioned before, the action plan looks fair because there is one most important content that is not in the plan, that is, how to distribute the harvest after the case is over. Most of the companies and funds in Trewayne Sheffield's hands are illegally obtained, and the federal law enforcement agencies have the power to block and confiscate them afterwards. The federal law enforcement agencies have no need to operate them, and will only sell them to those who are willing to buy them. Afterwards, most of the money will be taken away by the federal government, but the law enforcement team handling this case will also get a small part. But how to divide this small part? Roan and Elmer looked at each other, smiled, and turned to look at team leader Cecilia. Team leader Cecilia from the Ministry of Justice. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 399, Distribution of the Cake, Case Finale. 10 minutes later, the special investigation team, the conference room. At this time, the conference room was no longer as lively as before. More than a dozen agents from the 3 investigation teams all left and went to the office area outside to discuss the plan and make preparations before the planned action began. In the conference room, only the leaders of the 3 investigation teams were left. Luo An sat in the main seat and drank tea calmly. Elmer sat on the left and drank coffee, and Cecilia sat on the right and didn't move. Her face was frighteningly cold. Time passed by minute, and finally Cecilia couldn't hold back and spoke first. "We have the most evidence in our hands. I want 50%. The 3 of them just did a simple calculation, and the total value of Trewayne Sheffield's companies, industries, and illegal income added up to about $370 million US. Most of this money will be taken away by the federal government afterwards, and the 3 investigation teams can get about $11 million US. The 50% that Cecilia said is half of the $11 million she wants. Impossible." Elmer put down the coffee cup and smiled and rejected the proposal. "The eyes has made great efforts. It is impossible for it to only take that little." Thinking that she had led the team to handle this case for such a long time, but now it was divided by others, Cecilia's voice became colder. 40%. Elmer still shook his head. Just when Cecilia's face became more ugly and she was about to continue talking, Roan put down the teacup and asked with a faint smile, "Team leader Cecilia, I heard that you almost got promoted last time. Is this true?" Roan's voice fell. Team leader Cecilia frowned slightly, and team leader Elmer's eyes lit up slightly. 5 minutes later, team leader Cecilia left the meeting room expressionlessly. Roan and team leader Elmer looked at each other and laughed together. The final result of the 3 people's discussion was that the special investigation team and the eyes had a total of 75%, and the investigation team led by team leader Cecilia of the Department of Justice had 25%. In exchange, the case was nominally owned by team leader Cecilia on the documents. It was under her leadership that everyone solved the big guy in the underworld, Trewayne Sheffield. Compared to money, Cecilia lacked credit and wanted to be promoted. Roan, who had just been promoted, cared more about practical benefits and not the nominal matters of the case. He also did not like to be in the limelight and face those media who were digging into the matter. As for Elmer, as long as he solved the money laundering issues of Trevian Sheffield, he would have made great contributions within the eyes, so he did not care about the nominal matters of the case. After Cecilia left, the next issue was the distribution of the 75%. After a simple bargaining, 44% belonged to Roan's special investigation team and 31% to Elmer's ICI. Of course, considering Elmer's involvement when the ICI seized and processed the company's industries and illegal income under Trevian Sheffield, the total value must be higher than $11 million. Roan's special investigation team would take 40% of the extra part, and Elmer's ICI would take 60%. As for Cecilia, the head of the Justice Department, she only got 25% of the $11 million. She didn't ask for the extra money just now, so what does it have to do with her? Old fox. Little fox. After the discussion, Elmer and Roan looked at each other, said something to each other in their hearts, then raised their teacups and coffee cups together, clinked them, and laughed. Happy cooperation. X2. That night, at 9 o'clock in the evening, Roan, Elmer and Cecilia briefly discussed the specific details of the operation and the solution to the emergency in the office area of the special investigation team with a group of agents, and immediately ordered the agents to start the action. Sampson has been captured by Roan and his men. In order to avoid more trouble, Trevian Sheffield and others should be alerted and escape. The best way is to seize the time. As mentioned before, ICI, Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, has the power to arrest people first and then provide evidence, so Elmer did not say anything and directly led his men into Trevian Sheffield's villa. No one dared to stop him or resist along the way. The reputation of the eyes is not fake, not to mention that Elmer arrested people in the name of tax inspection. Once the resistance becomes armed resistance to taxation, it will not be these tax agents with only a small pistol who will be dispatched. Maybe even tanks will rush up. Trevian Sheffield was easily taken away by the eyes. While he was busy contacting his private accountant and private lawyer, Roan was leading Lassie, Mona and Michelle, and leading SWAT team members, to attack Trevian Sheffield's subordinates who were recorded in the FBI database. The whole operation process was quite fast. First, the new number blocker was turned on to prevent the subordinates from contacting Trevian Sheffield or asking for help, and then they broke into the room to arrest people. If they met the lower level shrimps who used force to resist, they were directly shot. After Roan and others successfully arrested Trevian Sheffield's men and brought them back to the special investigation team, Cecilia, the head of the Ministry of Justice, immediately led her men to severely interrogate the group of people. In addition to physical means, Cecilia and other agents used various other methods such as coercion, inducement, and soft and hard tactics, trying to get the key evidence that could keep Trevian Sheffield in prison forever in the shortest time. After a few hours, especially after Roan and Lassie and others joined the interrogation, one of the men finally couldn't bear it and spoke up. Once there is a first, there will be a second. Soon, the agents under Cecilia, the head of the Ministry of Justice, got the key evidence. Seeing this, Cecilia didn't waste any words and immediately applied to the court for an arrest warrant and a request to block all of Trevian Sheffield's assets. A few hours passed again, and it was 2:30 in the afternoon of the next day. Before Trevian Sheffield, his wife, Lanique Sheffield, and several accountants and private lawyers walked out of the eye's office, Cecilia, the head of the Department of Justice, walked up to them with an arrest warrant. Looking at the couple with ugly faces, she sneered, "Trevian Sheffield, Lanique Sheffield, you are under arrest." Just as Cecilia was holding the arrest warrant and showing off in front of the cursing Trevian Sheffield and his wife, Roan was sitting in the monitoring room, holding a teacup and drinking the Ying black tea given to him by team leader Elmer. The computer in the monitoring room showed the scene in the interrogation room next to it. Michelle and Lassie were recording with their heads down. Opposite them was Sampson, the murderer who chose to plead guilty and was willing to testify against Trevian Sheffield and tell everything. This case is basically over here. Mona, sitting on the chair next to Roan, looked at the scene in the computer with a complicated expression. Although there is still a lot of work to be done, Trevine Sheffield will definitely fight back with manpower and money, but with the joint efforts of the Special Investigation Team, ICI, and Cecilia's investigation team of the Department of Justice, Trevine Sheffield is destined to lose everything and go to jail. So, there is no good ending for those who are involved in the underworld. Roan smiled and patted Mona's arm. It is the right way to go from black to white, but this road has too many black and white prerequisites. Trevine Sheffield does not have those, so he is doomed to fail. Let's not talk about this. Mona shook her head and threw the messy thoughts in her mind aside. After Lassie and Michelle finished the interrogation, the two left the monitoring room to deal with Sampson's follow-up work. In the next few days, because this case involved many people, Roan and the Special Investigation Team agents have been dealing with work, and they also worked overtime for 2 days. On Friday night, Lassie knocked on the door and walked into the team leader's office. She pointed to the landline phone in the office area and said, "Roan, someone wants to see you." Chapter 400, Taking Stock of Harvest. The reason why Lassie was short of money. Special Investigation Team, office area. Luo An left the team leader's office and picked up the landline phone. He found that the person on the other end was John Rodriguez. Chapter 384. With Luo An's introduction, the other party successfully met with Mr. Clement of the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. Luo An didn't know what the two talked about and what conditions they exchanged, but when he heard John's hearty laughter on the phone, Luo An knew that this trip was definitely not in vain. "Then congratulations, President John." Luo An laughed. In the country of the Federation, the connection between businessmen and politicians is much closer than ordinary people imagine. The two help each other and restrain each other. In the past, when John Rodriguez worked in the CIA, Clement didn't need to meet him, but John has now transformed into the president of the Mueller Group, and there are many more maneuvers in it. Mr. Clement doesn't mind solving some small problems for John in the CIA. Hearing Roan's words, John Rodriguez on the other end of the phone laughed, said a few humble words, and after a brief exchange of greetings with Roan, he finally told Roan the purpose of his call. John's wife, and their daughter Kara had reserved a table at a French restaurant in Los Angeles on the weekend, and wanted to invite Roan to have a casual meal. No problem. Roan thought about it, and immediately realized that the other party's purpose was to get closer to him. Coincidentally, Roan also thought of some things that the other party could help with, so he smiled and nodded and agreed. After a brief exchange of greetings, the two hung up the phone. John, who was far away, immediately called his wife with a smile on his face to explain the situation, while Roan turned around and went back to his team leader's office. He still had some work to deal with. While dealing with the work, Roan also calculated the gains during this period. From the Hollywood rich man shooting case to the Judge Hotel sports murder case that was handled a few days ago, Roan handled a total of 4 cases during this period. After each case was solved, there was a $2,000 bonus. 2 of the cases had their bonuses doubled afterwards. With a weekly salary of $1,000, Roan's basic income during this period was as much as $16,000. After the Hollywood rich man shooting case was solved, the father of the 18-year-old female killer Lexa Odell, Chapter 337, 86-year-old old money Pranay Odell, donated $1 million to the Special Investigation Team and bought $4 million worth of stocks from Roan. Roan had divided the $1 million equally among the other 3 people in the Special Investigation Team, and Roan received $250,000. With the $4 million, Roan's income from this case totaled $4.25 million. In the next Villa District girl disappearance case, John Rodriguez donated $1 million to the Special Investigation Team. According to previous situations, the money was divided equally among the 4 members of the Special Investigation Team. In addition, John also gave Roan a personal thank you bonus of $3 million and a reward of $2 million for helping him meet Mr. Clement. Los Angeles Council Speaker physical split case. The smuggling case encountered in the middle. The Special Investigation Team received a total of $2.23 million US. There were 5 other new agents involved in this case, so Roan also gave them a small part of the money afterwards, and most of the rest was incorporated into the special investigation team's case handling funds. Roan and the other 4 only received a small part. The gains during this period added up to Roan's accumulation of $9.56 million US. Among them, Roan used $9 million US to buy Netflix stocks, and the remaining $560,000 US was kept by him as a reserve fund for emergencies. As for the Judge Hotel Movement sniper case that Roan is handling now, the subsequent gains from the buying and selling of illegal income companies, etc., will not be available for at least a year or 2, and Roan chooses to wait quietly. After handling his own gains, Roan also simply distributed the part that belonged to Mona, Michelle and Lassie. Looking at the $506,000 in the folder, Michelle's eyes suddenly lit up when she looked at Roan. Roan's teacup never ran out of water, and other than the documents that Roan had to handle, other documents never appeared on Roan's desk. When Mona saw this number, her breathing became rapid, and her eyes widened and rippled. Roan, who was familiar with Mona, could see at a glance that she couldn't hold back anymore, but this was the office area of the special investigation team after all, so Roan had to give her a look and told her to hold back and go home in the evening. Lassie was excited again when she saw this number, and the listlessness when she was handling documents disappeared instantly. She gave Roan a big hug and waved her hand to cover Roan's lunch for the next 3 months. A month. Luo An. Seeing the speechless expression on Luo An's face, Lassie smiled, walked behind Luo An, and massaged his shoulders, and explained with a smile, "You know, I'm short of money." Luo An turned around with a puzzled look on his face. "What are you doing? Why are you so short of money?" Based on Lassie's ridiculously low expenses on weekdays, plus the gains she has made in the special investigation team for so long, Luo An judged that her gains must have added up to more than $1 million. I plan to prepare more money for my retirement." Facing Luo An's question, Lassie was silent for a few seconds and explained with a low smile, "The probability of the federal court supporting same-sex marriage is very low, and I don't know what will happen in the future. There is a high probability that I will be alone when I grow old, so it is definitely right to prepare more money for retirement. I plan to save money to buy a house, a car, and some insurance for retirement security." Looking at Lassie, who is now planning for retirement, Luo An licked his lips and said nothing. He remembered that not long after 2005 in his previous life, a few years later, the state courts of several states in the Federation passed bills allowing same-sex marriage. If Lassie wanted to marry a girl, she could go to that state at that time. However, Luo An had no way to tell Lassie about this matter, and he couldn't say that he had the ability to predict the future, so he could only pat Lassie's arm to express his support for her. Living in the Federation, saving money is always a good thing. "Thank you." Hearing Luo An's support, Lassie smiled and thanked him as usual, and her gratitude to Luo An increased a little in her heart. This is another reason why Lassie likes to stay in the special investigation team and likes to work under Luo An. Luo An does not discriminate against Lassie's orientation and has never shown discrimination against Lassie in his words and deeds. He always treats Lassie as a normal person. This is not easy. The Federation in 2005 is still a conservative world, not to mention that conservative personnel account for the majority of law enforcement agencies such as the FBI. "You're welcome," Roan replied with a smile. He had roughly figured out Lassie's thoughts after such a long time, and he didn't want to do anything special. Just let it go. So he pointed to his left shoulder and said, "Go on, put a little more force here, Lassie." Time soon came to the time to get off work. Roan played poker with Mona on Friday night and stayed at home to rest the next day. At 8:30 on Sunday night, Roan drove with Mona, and the two of them accepted the invitation and went to the high-end French restaurant that John Rodriguez mentioned. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.